It was a bright, sunny day. The sky was a clear, vivid blue, without a single cloud in sight. The sun shone warmly and brilliantly, bathing everything around it in light. The silence, however, was broken by a tall, powerful lizard that attacked someone. But the man was clearly stronger. With a single precise strike of his dagger, he killed the enormous reptile. That person was none other than Senna Roshir, a young girl with black hair falling to her shoulders and eyes as dark as night. She looked very satisfied with such a large catch. She was a D-rank hunter in the Adventurers Guild. As they gathered materials, her partner praised Senna's fighting skills, amazed that she could defeat a D-rank monster in an instant. In an excellent mood, the girl picked up the bag full of spoils and headed home. But because of a moment's carelessness, she slipped and slammed her head hard against the ground. The moment she hit the ground, memories of her previous life came flooding back. She remembered that she had originally been an ordinary office worker. One day, she had fallen asleep while reading a novel. After that, another coworker woke her and told her that the lunch break was over and they would be late for their meeting. Hearing that, Senna got up and followed her coworker. On the way, she thought the story had been unbearably boring, especially since the protagonist had actually run away, but she still decided to finish reading it after the meeting. Her memories ended there, and when she woke up, she had already become Senna Roshir. When she opened her eyes in that unfamiliar environment, the girl panicked. She had no idea what those memories really were, nor could she tell where the boundary of reality lay. A concerned doctor helped her sit up, and as she tried to sort out her thoughts, the heroine realized that she had been reincarnated into a book she had read in her previous life. Unfortunately, to her great regret, she could not remember the full plot and only recalled a few fragments from the beginning. Noticing the girl's confusion, the doctor explained that she had hit her head quite hard, though fortunately the injury was not serious. The doctor also said that it was common for hunters to get hurt. Hearing that, Senna suddenly remembered that hunters reincarnated into stories like this usually received special powers and skills. Realizing that, she tried calling up a status window. To everyone around her, the scene looked extremely strange. The doctor froze and asked the heroine why she had suddenly shouted such things. Seeing the patient's bizarre behavior, the doctor concluded that it was a side effect of her head injury and immediately ordered the nurses to register the girl and prepare surgery at once. Startled by the situation, Senna hurriedly swore that she was fine. After leaving the hospital, the girl let out a disappointed sigh because she had to spend all of her earnings on medical bills. Now she had no idea how she was going to manage this month's food expenses. At the same time, she still found it hard to believe that she was really living in a fantasy world. As she analyzed her life now, she could not understand why her past self had worked so desperately, nor could she figure out what role she was supposed to play in this story. Senna guessed she was not the protagonist, but she was not sure whether she was even an important side character. First, the girl decided to recall whether there had been a hunter character in the book. Strangely enough, she clearly remembered the title, but barely remembered the plot. She could not even recall the protagonist's name. Not far from Senna stood a young girl with long golden hair, holding a bouquet of flowers. When a passing man called her Allan, Senna remembered that the heroine of the story seemed to have that name too. Suddenly, a young man confessed to Allan right in the middle of the street without the slightest hesitation. Senna was shocked to discover that her neighbor had the same name as the heroine in the book. At that moment, a description of the heroine from the story suddenly surfaced in her mind. A young girl named Allan Equiles, who ran a flower shop and received confessions every single day. Senna was stunned to realize that she had been living right next door to the protagonist all along. Yet, even after confirming that she really had entered a novel, she still could not understand why she had no status window in a situation like this. All her hopes were shattered, because the truth was that in this story, she was nothing more than an ordinary neighbor. Just then, a shy young man asked Allan if she would go out with him. His words left the girl a little flustered, but she blushed and turned him down. While the confused young man and woman were wrapped up in their own little world, a gloomy aura hung over Senna. She was deeply dissatisfied with her place in this world. And so, a month passed after Senna regained her memories. During that time, she also recalled a little more of the original story. The core of the story was finding the male lead. That was why Allan had to listen to people confess to her every day, and she would politely reject them, after which those insignificant characters would always leave in tears. While observing Allan, Senna noticed that only one man confessed to her each day. From that, the girl guessed that at this rate, it would take forever to find the male lead. Just as Senna thought today's confession scene was over, a much stronger gust of wind suddenly blew through. It hit her in the face, sending her hair flying everywhere. As she irritably tried to smooth down her wind-blown hair, a silver-haired man walked past her. When a young man called out Allan's name, the girl was startled. Hearing the familiar voice, Allan turned around with a smile. When she asked if he had come to buy flowers, Dion denied it and said he had something important to tell her. After gathering his courage, the man confessed his feelings to her. Allan was stunned by his words. Before she could respond, Dion ended his confession by asking her to marry him. Senna was stunned by the confession too, because Allan had already been confessed to once that day. At that very moment, the boring rule that had lasted for an entire month was broken. It was both shocking and strange. And the reason everything changed was this man, who did not look like a nameless side character at all. In her shock, Senna stood frozen, eyes wide and lips parted slightly. She could hardly believe what she was seeing and hearing. The excited man proposed to Allan, promising that he would make her happy. But her heart was not moved in the slightest. She rejected him immediately. Dion pressed her for the reason. So Allan explained that they had only known each other for a month. Only after hearing that did Dion realize that just 1 month had passed since they first met. And yet, his feelings could not possibly be summed up by such a short span of time. Senna, meanwhile, found the whole scene painfully cliché. Sitting on a bench and watching the pair, the heroine was disappointed to find that although the rule had been broken, the result was still the same. Looking at them, she could not help wondering whether things would continue exactly as they always did. If everything kept going like this, then first, Allan would turn around and walk back into the flower shop, and then the man would collapse to his knees. And when events unfolded exactly as she had predicted, she was thoroughly bored. Still, considering that the rule had been broken at last, she gave Dion's confession a score of 80. After that performance ended, Senna decided to go home. However, the heartbroken man remained seated on the cold ground. The girl did not know quite what to make of it. Dion did not seem any different from the others. Every man who confessed to Allan in front of Senna's house immediately fell into despair once he was rejected. So this scene did not surprise her. However, Dion remained in that state longer than the other candidates. He kept crying and calling Allan's name over and over. Looking at his face, Senna noticed that he was by far the most handsome of them all. The man kept shedding tears. Watching him, Senna realized that he was truly heartbroken. She decided to stay on the bench a little longer and give him time to calm down. Evening slowly descended over the city, and the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in vivid shades of red, orange, and purple. The sky gradually darkened, and stars began to appear. Then it started to rain, the first drop falling to the ground. The rain steadily grew heavier, and within minutes it had turned into a downpour. So Senna decided to remind Dion that he was sitting in front of her house and ask him to move aside. Soaked to the bone, the tearful man looked at the unfamiliar girl. Seeing his silver hair and blue eyes up close, she nearly drowned in his beauty. However, she suddenly remembered rumors going around in her social circle about a man with those exact features. That person's name was Dion Flavel. After hearing his own name from a strange girl, the man asked whether she knew him. Instead of answering directly, she asked why someone so important was sitting in front of her house. As she stood before him, she remembered the first time she had heard that name. At the time, other hunters had told her that Dion was the eldest son of their guild leader. Whenever they talked about him, those girls became unusually excited and competed to praise his looks. It was also from them that Senna learned the eldest son of the Flavel family was the type to fall in love at first sight, and that he had silver hair and blue eyes. Back then, the heroine had not believed those rumors, but her friends insisted the rumors were true and told her even more about him, saying that the guild leader would not allow him to join the guild because his personality was absolutely terrible. After hearing all that, Senna became convinced that Dion was a hot-tempered bastard. She had even said that she hoped to meet him in person someday. And now, she was staring blankly at the man of endless rumors. At this moment, the infamous guild leader's son was sitting right in front of her house. Senna could not simply ignore him. considering he was the son of the guild leader of the guild where she worked. So she decided to get on his good side, hoping it would help her regain her C rank. Seeing the thoughtful expression on the unfamiliar girl's face, Dion stood up and asked whether she had something she wanted to say to him. In order to curry favor with the guild leader's son, she forced a smile and apologized for remaining silent for so long. Then, still wearing the same smile, she said the problem was actually very simple. He was standing in front of her house. As she spoke, she pointed to her front door. He turned his head, finally noticed the door, and hurriedly apologized before moving out of her way. Senna accepted the apology with a smile and even invited him inside to get out of the rain. Dion was very surprised by the strange girl's gesture. The man agreed with a smile and thanked her. After they went inside, the girl asked him to sit down and lent him several towels. While the man waited on the sofa, the girl brought over some hot tea. At the time, Dion was wiping his face and hair with a towel. To Senna, the sight was breathtakingly beautiful. His looks were so striking that the girl almost forgot to breathe. The man gratefully accepted the teacup. After placing the tray on the table, the girl thought that her home must look terribly shabby in his eyes. Picking up her own tea, the girl sat down on the sofa beside him. Looking at him, she thought he did not seem like someone with a terrible personality at all, nothing like the bad guy described in the rumors. Even so, she still could not remember whether a man with silver hair and blue eyes had appeared in the novel's illustrations. Because of that, Senna judged that Dion was probably just a secondary character. That meant he was simply one of the many men who would ultimately fail to win the heroine's heart. As she sipped her tea, she continued thinking that not even the guild leader's son had the power to resist the plot of the book. The man broke the silence first and thanked the girl again. He knew that the girl in the yard had seen everything, but Senna pretended not to understand what he meant. However, realizing there was no point in denying it, the embarrassed girl awkwardly replied that she simply had not wanted to disturb them, so he did not need to worry about it. But the man wanted someone to talk to, so he asked Senna to listen to his story until the rain stopped. Since it was no great trouble, the heroine agreed. After hearing her answer, Dion thanked her and began telling his story. Senna was extremely surprised to hear that Allan was actually Dion's childhood friend and first love, because Allan had said that she and Dion had only known each other for a month. Then the man explained that there was a reason Allan thought that way. After all, she had erased all of her memories, especially the warm, bright time she had spent with him, coming up with new games together, going on all kinds of adventures, and playing pranks together. And the reason Allan had made such a drastic choice was the painful past that had always haunted her. Allan Euclides was the heroine of the world Senna lived in. Because she was the illegitimate daughter of Marquee Euclides, she had been bullied by everyone throughout her childhood. In the end, she decided to run away from home. But she could never forget that painful past, so she sought out a witch and erased all of her memories. Hearing that, Senna remembered that this was exactly the backstory from the book she had read in her previous life. Long ago, young Dion had attended a ball all by himself. The man went on, and, at the time, the only person who approached him first was Allan. From that day on, Dion could never forget her warm smile and soft hands. Back then, he could never have imagined that such a kind girl had endured so much pain. And after learning that she had erased her memories and run away, the man searched every corner of the royal capital just to find her. Even if she no longer remembered him, it did not matter. Later, after finding her, Dion had believed he would be able to protect her, and he wanted to start over with her. But as time passed, more and more men confessed to her, not to mention that suspicious man who had been stalking her lately. Senna froze slightly and looked at the person before her with a questioning gaze. Dion then explained that the man looked like an ordinary visitor, but was clearly of noble birth. Hearing that, the girl guessed that maybe he had been sent by Allan's family and asked Dion what he thought. Dion replied that he thought that was possible too, since the Euclides family was also searching for her. But what bothered him was that, as things stood now, he had no real connection to Allan, so if something happened, he would not be able to help her. Hearing that, Senna finally understood why Dion had suddenly proposed. He wanted to become someone close to Allan. In response, the man merely nodded silently, confirming the heroine's guess. After finishing his story, Dion noticed that the rain had stopped and hurriedly said goodbye at the door. Before parting, Senna did her best to comfort him and told him not to be so downhearted. She smiled as she offered him a few encouraging words. At last, Dion showed a smile for the first time in quite a while, thanked the girl again, and left. Only after the guild leader's son had gone did the girl finally relax a little. The day had been utterly exhausting for her. After seeing her guest off, Senna decided to take a bath and go straight to bed. Then suddenly, she realized that when Dion left, he had called her by name. But Senna clearly remembered that she had never told him her name. Morning descended over the city. The streets slowly awakened, and the sounds of carriages and people's voices gradually filled the air. The heroine was jolted awake by a terrible crashing noise. Sleep-deprived, the girl instantly flew into a rage. But she still had no choice but to get up. Fuming, she went outside to see what was happening on the street. The door suddenly flew open and struck someone standing behind it. The unexpected collision startled the girl too, and she quickly asked the stranger if he was all right. The unfamiliar person greeted Senna and apologized for standing in front of her door. Seeing that the person standing before her was just a child, the heroine relaxed a little and asked what all the commotion was about, as well as about the knights beside the luxurious carriage. Senna guessed that they had come to arrest someone. However, the other person denied it and said they had come because of the flower shop owner, since their master wanted her to become his personal gardener. The heroine truly could not understand why a nobleman would want to hire an ordinary flower shop owner from a small town. It occurred to her that maybe this was the suspicious man Dion had mentioned. Exhausted by all these non-stop thoughts, Senna decided it was time to stop overthinking, since it would not help anyway. After learning the reason for the uproar, she said goodbye and hurried back home. However, before she could even close the door, a man pushed past her and strode straight into her house. Senna thought the gentleman had simply gone to the wrong place and reminded him that he had the wrong house and that the flower shop was nearby, but the man did not seem to be listening at all. Realizing that this stranger had no intention of leaving, the girl demanded to know why he had barged into her home. At the same time, an excited knight was still asking his master whether he had successfully negotiated with the flower shop owner. Before the man's subordinate could even finish his question, he coldly replied that Ellie had refused him, then continued walking farther inside while looking around. Suddenly, he stopped, turned around, and in a matter-of-fact tone declared that he wanted to buy Senna's house. While the girl was still stunned, he arrogantly ordered her to name her price. The shocked girl did not know how to respond for a moment. Noticing her confusion, the man with hair black as night and crimson eyes like rubies decided to introduce himself first to make his status clear. The moment she heard the name Rashid Kalman, Senna immediately realized that the person standing before her was the Duke. Looking satisfied, the man confirmed his identity and once again asked how much it would take to buy the house. But the girl truly could not understand why the Duke, who already had a mansion, would need an old house like this. Yet before the other man could even answer, she had already figured out the reason herself. There were not many possibilities. Most likely, this was a way he had come up with to get close to Allan. Even for a high-ranking noble, this was far too suspicious. Before Senna could answer, Rashid started naming a price on his own based on the average value of houses like this. But the heroine cut him off and flatly refused to sell. Neither the Duke nor his attendants had expected such a response. The loyal knight could not tolerate anyone treating his master so rudely, so he began scolding the girl for her lack of manners. But Senna did not think his words made any sense. Then the man stopped just talking and drew his sword outright. But as a D-rank hunter, she easily dodged the attack. She had no intention of putting up with treatment like this, so she warned him that if he attacked again, she would not just stand there like a post, she would fight back. To prevent a fight from breaking out, the Duke ordered the knight to stop. Just then, another knight standing by the door got hit in the back of the head again. It turned out to be Dion, who had accidentally struck the man when he opened the door to come inside. Dion apologized to him, then greeted Senna with a charming smile. The girl had not expected a visitor at all, so she asked in surprise what he was doing there. The Duke, however, clearly knew the man and seemed very displeased with him. Once Senna learned that the two men knew each other, she was actually a little pleased. Of course, Dion was no happier about this encounter. Rashid explained that he was here because he wanted to buy the house. Then Dion replied with a polite smile that this was impossible because he was the one intending to buy it. Those words shocked the girl all over again. Ignoring the owner of the house, the two uninvited guests continued arguing over who would ultimately get it and who could offer the higher price. After a while, Senna's patience finally ran out. She shouted at the top of her lungs for the two of them to shut up. The furious girl once again declared that the house was not for sale. Even the experienced knights were stunned by the hunter's ferocious expression. Suddenly, the girl felt a headache coming on. At last, the Duke realized that there was no point in continuing to talk about buying the house. Not wanting to waste any more time, he left Senna's home with his men. The heroine was satisfied with that, but she also knew that Rashid would come back again. Dion thought the same. After the Duke left, the guild leader's son said that there was something he wanted to ask, but before he could speak, the girl suddenly collapsed. Fortunately, the man caught her in time, so she did not hit the floor. Senna's head was pounding from all the stress and tension. The man immediately called for a doctor. After examining the patient, the doctor concluded that it was just a common cold and that a little rest would make her better. The girl was surprised, since she had never been sick before, but the doctor said that was not strange. Anyone could fall ill one day. Since Senna had only just been hospitalized a few days earlier, the doctor told the man to take good care of his wife before leaving, and that remark left the unmarried pair frozen on the spot. Before either of them could clear up the misunderstanding, the doctor had already left the house. Whether because of the fever or from embarrassment, Senna's face turned as red as a tomato. After the doctor's comment, the man also fell into a brief daze. Senna sat down on the sofa and sincerely thanked him for helping her just now and for bringing the doctor. Dion explained that he had suddenly appeared because he had originally come to see Allan, but later heard the commotion here and decided to come over and see what was happening. Hearing that, the girl happily replied that she was glad he had arrived when he did. But the man apologized because he felt that he was the reason the girl had gotten caught in the rain, and that was probably why she had come down with a cold. Senna was touched by Dion's concern, and the guilt written all over the young man's face left her completely defenseless. In response, Senna said she did not blame Dion at all, and instead ought to thank him for helping drive Duke Kalman away. Hearing that, Dion quickly explained that he had never actually intended to buy the house, and had only said that to help Senna out of the situation. Only then did the girl finally relax, because she really had been startled earlier. Dion was also glad that he had been able to help. After the conversation ended, the man told the heroine to go back to bed and rest. He also promised to keep an eye on the house for her until she recovered, which left the girl astonished, because she had assumed Dion was going next door. But the man replied that it was not that important and that he could go another day. Dion solemnly told the girl to make sure she got some sleep and rest properly. When Senna said she wanted to ask him a few things the next time they met, the man happily agreed, saying that whatever her questions were, he would answer them. Leaning back, the girl said that on the day they first met, Dion had called her by name right away, but she was certain she had never told him what it was. The man then looked deeply surprised and answered that she herself had told him. But the girl firmly believed that was not true. Then Dion recalled with complete certainty that on the day they first met, Senna had already introduced herself. Hearing that, the girl was utterly shocked because she had no memory of it at all, while the man asked in surprise whether she had really forgotten. Dion did not sound like he was lying, so the girl began to doubt her own memory. Besides, the man had no reason to lie about something like that. Suddenly, Senna remembered something else as well, the suspicious man they had talked about before. So she decided to confirm whether that person was Duke Kalman. When she heard the answer was no, she froze, because she had almost completely convinced herself that it was Rashid. Dion then explained that the man also had dark hair, but it was a little longer and seemed to have a purple tint. After hearing that, she became completely certain that the stalker was not the Duke. Then the two of them began thinking together about who the stalker could be. Suddenly, the girl realized that she had no energy right now to worry about her neighbor. She should worry about herself first, because Duke Kalman had said he would come back. So she firmly declared that if the Duke brought up buying the house again next time, she would fight back. Dion asked her exactly how she planned to do that. So the girl began thinking of possible methods. And the very first thought that popped in her head was to beat Rashid up properly. But when she thought about getting arrested for that, she decided she would have to wait until there were no witnesses. What she said left Dion utterly stunned, but a moment later, a radiant smile spread across his face, and he replied with a laugh that it was actually not a bad idea. A few hours later, after confirming that the girl was no longer in any serious condition, the man gave her a few more reminders before finally leaving. By then, evening had already fallen outside, and the sky was dyed in vivid colors by the brilliant sunset. After confirming that Senna had closed the door properly, Dion turned and walked away. As he made his way down the road, he thought to himself that, strictly speaking, speaking, he had not lied to the girl. He had said that she told him her name when they first met. At that moment, Allan was arranging flowers in the shop. Looking at the delicate blossoms, she found herself thinking of Rashid Kalman. At first, she had been frightened when she saw that nobleman surrounded by knights. But the beauty of the man who had asked her to become his gardener, along with his gentle tone, had moved her. When he looked at her, he saw her as a professional, not just as a girl. Allan was happy that someone of such high status recognized her abilities, but she did not think she was suited to be a gardener on a ducal estate. That was why she had no choice but to turn the Duke down. She told her friend about it during their tea gathering. After listening carefully, that mysterious friend suggested that perhaps the man truly liked Allan. Hearing that, the girl lowered her eyes slightly. Her gaze dropped, her cheeks flushed red as blood rushed to them, and her lips pressed together softly. The shy girl did not believe it could really be true, but her heart still fluttered. Just as Allan was getting lost in romantic daydreams, Senna noticed her and came over to greet her. Senna said she wanted to buy some white flowers. Allan immediately ran over to her neighbor in high spirits. The glow on the girl's face was impossible to ignore, so Senna decided to ask why she looked so happy. Allan excitedly shared the good news with her neighbor, saying that a noble-born man had come to see her yesterday and asked her to become his gardener. But Senna was full of misunderstanding and could not understand at all why Allan admired him so much. Then the girl added that this was the first time anyone had paid attention not to her looks, but to her skill. Senna immediately realized who she was talking about, and that made her deeply displeased, because she had never expected Allan to react like this, much less for her neighbor to possibly develop feelings for the Duke. Even so, Allan finished telling her story in a somewhat downcast voice, saying that because she was not sure she could handle such an important job, she had no choice but to refuse. Then she suddenly remembered that Senna had come to buy flowers and ran into the shop to pick out some white ones. Looking over the different pale-colored flowers, Allan wondered which kind to choose. Senna did not have a good impression of the Duke, so she worried that he might come back again to persuade Allan, especially now that her neighbor was already halfway won over. At the same time, Senna was on Dion's side and did not want to see him disappointed again. That was why she decided to interfere. Senna brought out all of her acting skills and put on a gloomy expression, saying there was something that had been troubling her terribly. Just as expected, kind-hearted Allan immediately asked what was wrong. Senna kept up the act, pretending to hesitate over whether she should tell her neighbor. However, she did not need much coaxing. Leaning close to Allan's ear, she whispered in a sinister tone that someone had broken into her house yesterday. Then she pulled back slightly and explained that it had been Rashid Kalman and his men. After that, she vividly, and with some exaggeration, described how that dreadful Duke had pressured her into selling him her house. Hearing that Rashid had behaved so forcefully and had even threatened Senna, Allan turned pale with fright. Then, with a gentle smile, the girl took Allan's hand and said in a worried voice that she would take care of herself, so there was no need to worry. But in truth, she was more worried about her neighbor, because she felt that the Duke needed the houses in this area, and in her eyes, he seemed like the kind of man who enjoyed tormenting people who had rejected him. The innocent girl believed every word Senna said. She was badly shaken and could not understand how a man could do such things. Now everything the Duke had done and said seemed suspicious. Allan came to the horrified realization that all of his earlier actions had only been for the sake of getting her house. After finishing that embellished story, Senna watched her neighbor's reaction. Allan was now completely disillusioned by the Duke's underhanded methods. Then Senna kept adding fuel to the fire. In a sympathetic tone, she said that because she was a hunter, she had at least been able to protect her land. But Allan would be much easier to take advantage of. She urged her to be careful and avoid getting involved with that man as much as possible. By the end of the conversation, she repeatedly warned Allan that it would be best to ignore the Duke completely. After hearing all of this, Allan was terrified, so she agreed with her neighbor and thanked her, saying she would be much more careful from now on. Hearing Allan say exactly what she wanted to hear and feeling satisfied with her reaction, Senna replied with a friendly smile that there was no need to thank her, since neighbors ought to look out for each other. Having successfully ruined Rashid Kalman's image completely, the heroine felt very pleased with herself. The next day, she excitedly told Dion about it. After hearing the girl's account, he looked somewhat surprised and asked her to confirm whether this meant she had deliberately spoken badly of the Duke in front of Allan. But Senna immediately denied it sharply. She explained that it had just been ordinary conversation between neighbors, and that Allan had interpreted it that way because of the way she had been raised. She also added that every single thing she had said was grounded in indisputable fact. Then Dion asked what she planned to do if the Duke found out, but Senna barely listened. She noticed that Allan had come outside and instantly perked up. With a bright smile, sparkling eyes, and slightly flushed cheeks, she told Dion that at the very least he should go say hello to her. But before she could even finish speaking, the neighbor went back inside again. So, trying to comfort the somewhat disappointed-looking Dion, Senna told him that it would definitely work out next time. The man, however, only felt awkward. Senna took his confused expression for dejection, assuming it was because he had been rejected before. Smiling with complete sincerity, she promised that she would help him. Suddenly, Dion placed a hand on the girl's forehead and discovered that she was still running a fever, even though she herself had not noticed it at all. In a worried tone, Dion told her not to do this again, but the heroine did not understand what he meant. Then the man clarified that what he meant was that Senna should not interfere with the Duke for his sake. Next, Dion gave her a dazzling smile and said that he had decided to let Allan go. On the way home, the girl kept thinking about what the guildmaster's son had said, unable to understand how that could possibly be true. After all, he had said that he had loved Allan all his life. She could not understand how he could give up so easily, and she worried that he might go off and cry alone again. Senna remembered how Dion had looked when she first saw him crying. She was afraid that maybe, even now, he was somewhere weeping again. As her thoughts kept sliding into troubling fantasies, an image formed in her mind. Dion crying endlessly over his unrequited love, unable to see where he was going, and possibly running into bandits. And those bandits, seeing how noble he looked, would try to rob him, but that cute and timid man would be completely unable to resist. Just imagining all the things that might happen was enough to terrify Senna. She immediately ran in the direction the man had gone, hoping to catch up with him and make sure he was safe. Just then, she suddenly heard a scream and instantly assumed it might be Dion. She kept blaming herself for leaving her friend alone in such a dangerous place. She rushed toward the sound, wanting to help him. However, the one lying on the ground was not Dion. The one responsible for all of it was, in fact, their kind Dion himself. His silver hair gleamed as though it had absorbed all the moonlight. Not understanding what was happening, the girl decided to hide behind the corner of a wall and observe. That arrogant gentleman was venting his anger on a group of thugs unlucky enough to have crossed his path. Suddenly, the man sensed the presence of a stranger and, in a lofty tone, ordered them to stop hiding and come out. Senna was badly startled because she thought he was talking to her. What Dion said next shocked her even more, because he said that a wall could not hide the body of a peeping creep. Although the girl also thought she was not exactly small, she was certainly not big enough to deserve to be described that way. As Senna stood there frozen, not knowing what to do, a man emerged from behind another corner with both hands raised. His name was Turner, and Dion had been talking to him the whole time. When his friend asked why he had been hiding, Turner replied that it was because he looked far too terrifying. Then he asked in return whether the man on the ground was still alive. Dion answered with a sinister smile that he was, because he was sure the bastard would take care of his own aftermath. The moment they heard that, the street robbers scrambled to their feet with all their strength and fled in terror. Watching them run away, Dion arrogantly remarked that he did not understand why they were fleeing, since they would die sooner or later anyway. Then Turner suddenly told him that the higher-ups had contacted him and asked whether Dion was really busy investigating something. Dion lightly draped a hand over his friend's shoulder, pulled him closer with a cold smile, and asked whether Turner truly intended to report that he had been doing nothing. Frightened, the man hastily denied it again and again. Suddenly, their conversation was interrupted by a girl who looked like a young maiden. She wore a black cloak that covered almost her entire face, with 2 brown braids sticking out from beneath the hood. She called out to the 2 of them, and they immediately followed her. Senna staggered from shock and fear. Her legs gave out, and she could no longer remain standing, collapsing straight down onto the ground. She could not accept that the one who truly looked like a villain was Dion. At that moment, Dion was walking somewhere with his companions. Suddenly, the girl turned and asked him what was wrong, because to her, he did not look very well. When he did not answer, she asked again, saying that they had already found Allan. So what exactly was he still troubled about? Dion finally spoke, but only said that the problem was not that. Then, with a sly grin, the girl guessed that it was because of Senna Rochier. The look on Dion's face was clearer than any spoken answer. The girls immediately understood that the two of them had finally met. Meanwhile, Senna was still struggling to process what she had just learned. The next day, the heroine went to the guild, which was as crowded as ever. As she waited in line, her mind was still on what had happened the day before. After all, the Dion she had seen then was nothing like the Dion she usually knew. And after hearing what Turner had said, she still had no idea who exactly the so-called higher-ups were. Considering that Dion was the guildmaster's son, the girl guessed that he might be some kind of secret guild agent or something along those lines. While the heroine was lost in thought, she failed to notice that it was already her turn. Only when she heard the clerk call for her did she snap back to reality and hurry to the counter. The clerk cheerfully greeted the hunter. Senna returned the greeting and said she was glad to see her too. Anna assumed the heroine had come to take on a new job and quickly began leafing through the list of requests, but the girl stopped her and said she had come to ask about something. As she said that, Senna leaned closer to the curious clerk and lowered her voice to ask about Dion Flavial. Since he was the guild master's son, Anna naturally knew who he was, so Senna asked her to tell her everything she knew. The first description that came to the clerk's mind was that he was a hot-tempered, crazy idiot. Then she added that Dion was the son of the guild master's first wife, but it seemed that the guild master's siblings had caused that wife a great deal of trouble. The main reason they treated her that way was because she came from a lowly background. In the end, she died young, and according to rumor, she had been tormented to death by the guild master's relatives. Young Dion apparently believed the same thing, so he began taking revenge on them. There were also rumors that Dion stole the fiancée of the guild master's younger brother, Sirone Flavial. According to the same rumors, the engagement of the guild master's sister, Isabella Flavial, was also ruined by Dion because he stole her fiancée. It was because of those rumors that everyone thought he was a crazy idiot. By this point, Senna was completely dumbfounded. She could not even tell whether they were really talking about the same person. In the end, Anna concluded that the heroine would do best not to get involved with that man. Hearing Senna's final remark, Anna immediately grew flustered because she had not expected Anna to see through her so easily. But the clerk was quite sharp and instantly understood that Senna could not have come all the way here to ask out of mere boredom, so the answer was obvious. She must have run into him somewhere. Anna did not press her for details and only strongly urged her to stay away from that man because he was truly dangerous. Senna thanked her for the warning, said goodbye to Anna, and told her to let her know if any interesting requests came up. As usual, there were many hunters in the room, but one person in particular stood out. Anna immediately noticed the newcomer and signaled for Senna to look. The girl looked in the direction the clerk indicated and saw the Duke. The heroine had never expected to run into him here, and she desperately tried to hide her face so he would not notice her. She quickly said goodbye to Anna and ran toward the exit, wanting to leave as soon as possible. The whole time, she kept her face covered with her hair and did everything she could to avoid the Duke's gaze. Because of that, she failed to notice the person standing in front of her and accidentally ran right into him. Realizing she was at fault, she immediately apologized. But the arrogant hunter was clearly in no mood to speak civilly. Senna still did not want to attract unnecessary attention, so she responded as politely as she could. Marcel, however, seemed to be provoking her on purpose. Even so, the most important thing to Senna right now was to get out of there as quickly as possible, so she endured it and only wanted to end the exchange and flee. But that only made those men more brazen, and their words grew ruder with every line. They not only mocked her, but also dragged the people close to her into it. The hunter insulted Senna and even mocked her over her father's death. She could not hold back any longer and sharply retorted that her father was still alive. Marcel only laughed louder and said that was impossible, but Senna did not listen to the rest of his ridicule. Instead, she gave him a frightening smile and asked why he always went out of his way to talk to her whenever they met when they were not even friends, and stressed that Marcel's behavior was far too conceited. In the end, she decided to return his insult word for word and told him to go brush his teeth first, because his breath stank so badly that every girl rejected him. That completely enraged him. The next moment, Marcel was the first to turn aggressive. He grabbed the girl by the chest and roared at her to shut up. But Senna remained very calm. She still smiled at him with a haughty look because she had complete confidence in her own ability. Then Marcel completely lost his mind and tried to strike her. Senna had no intention of dodging because everything was proceeding exactly as she had planned. If he hit her first, then whatever she did afterward would count as self-defense. But at that moment, someone grabbed his hand, stopping the attack, and arrogantly pointed out Marcel's unfairness and cowardice. Most surprisingly of all, the one who stepped in to stand up for Senna was none other than Duke Kalman. The hunter grew even angrier, desperately trying to wrench his hand free while shouting for him to let go. But Rashid coldly ordered him to stop making such a fuss, saying he was already having trouble holding back. Then he flung Marcel aside. The hunter hit the ground hard. His face twisted with rage. He shouted that he would never let this go. Rashid showed a malicious smile and replied that Marcel was nothing but a minor nuisance. Senna stared blankly at everything happening before her. Once he was done with the hunter, the Duke immediately switched back into a perfectly courteous mode, walked over to the girl, and asked if she was all right. The heroine could not understand at all what was going on anymore. With an awkward smile, she answered that she was fine and thanked him for helping her, while inwardly mourning the collapse of her perfect self-defense plan. At first, the Duke did not quite believe her and wanted to confirm it again, but suddenly he realized that the person standing before him was the owner of that house. While the two of them were talking, Marcel recovered some of his strength and attacked Rashid from behind. Senna noticed in time and successfully warned Duke Kalman. Thanks to that, he turned around in time and blocked the attack. Even after stopping the blow, the Duke continued commenting on Marcel's behavior, and every word he said only made the man more agitated. In the end, the hunter drew a dagger. The moment Senna saw him about to attack an unarmed man with a blade, she could no longer stand by. In one clean motion, she kicked the weapon flying away. After that, the Duke knocked the man unconscious with a single punch. The force was so great that Marcel was sent flying several meters. Senna was glad that idiot had finally acted in time. As soon as word spread that a fight had broken out, the knights responsible for keeping order inside the guild rushed over at once. Seeing hunters lying on the ground, they decided to arrest the people responsible. And just like that, Senna ended up in a cell. Worst of all, the guards had arrived at the exact moment they struck back. If the girl herself had also been injured, she might still have been able to negotiate somehow. On top of that, because the Duke had no escort with him, no one recognized him, and he ended up being locked up together with the heroine. Out of courtesy, the girl asked the Duke whether he was all right and even suggested getting something to eat. However, he refused, saying his assistant would come for him soon. Unexpectedly, he apologized to Senna for that incident, which shocked her. He explained that he was sorry for entering her house without permission and promised that Garrett would be punished. Senna did not know who that was, but from the context she understood that it was the knight who had attacked her earlier. Rashid explained that the knight was a lazy one who had never received proper training, and the only reason he still held that position was because his father was a loyal vassal of the ducal house. The girl accepted the apology and said it was all right. She was still stunned by everything happening in front of her. Senna felt that most nobles would have reacted very differently in a situation like this. For example, they might have taken their anger out on her, or kept raging at the guards and demanding to be released immediately. Marcel, for one, came to mind. His family might also be noble, but they only had a title to their name, and yet he acted as if he could do absolutely anything he pleased. After thinking the whole thing through, she came to the conclusion that this Duke was a strange man. 3 hours later, however, no one had come for Rashid. The girl was astonished by this, so she guessed that perhaps something had happened, which was why the assistant had not come. When the Duke asked her what exactly she meant, she could not answer. What she said only made the man more distrustful and more wary. The atmosphere became extremely tense. Senna had no idea what she was supposed to say in a situation like this, so she proposed that they had to come up with some kind of solution, since they were now in the same boat. The heroine's last words caught the Duke quite off guard. Senna could not think of any better idea, so she simply went to tell the jailer that the man beside her was of noble birth. But as expected, the man did not believe her at all. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed over, and the girl immediately brightened, thinking the Duke's assistant had finally arrived. But it was not. The newcomer said he had come for Senna Rocher. However, neither the Duke nor the heroine knew who he was. The stranger introduced himself as young Master Marcel's butler and said he had come on his master's orders to demand compensation of 1,000,000 rupees. The girl was so shocked by the amount that she could not speak. The butler stated that the sum included not only today's damages, but other previous losses as well, and added that Senna's father had caused his young master's teacher's death. The moment she heard that, the girl's anger flared up, and before he could finish, she corrected him, saying it had merely been an accident that occurred during a mission. At that point, the Duke also spoke up and asked what exactly this was about. It turned out that Arya Assel, Marcel's teacher, had died while carrying out a request assigned by Senna's father, so the butler and that young master had decided that he was responsible for the teacher's death. But Senna insisted that Assel had accepted that request willingly in her capacity as a hunter. Yet to that despicable butler, that did not matter in the slightest. All he wanted was a huge payout. Then, with a malicious smile, he suddenly added that he had one more condition. The condition was that if her companion agreed to be tied up and let Marcel beat him, then no money would be required. If he got on his knees right now, he might even take 1 or 2 fewer blows. At that moment, the Duke's assistant burst in. The girl immediately told Allan that his master had actually been locked up in a dump like this. Allan rushed straight to the Duke's side and anxiously demanded to know what had happened and how things had ended up like this. At that, the butler and the jailer finally realized that he really was the Duke. Senna did not miss the chance and gave a detailed account of Marcel's attempt to beat the Duke. Hearing this, the butler went deathly pale while the jailer wisely stepped back. The man panicked and desperately tried to come up with some excuse that sounded even remotely acceptable, but the assistant was already furious beyond measure. After a while, they all sat down at the negotiating table. When the Duke called out to Allan, the assistant immediately stepped forward. The butler and the guard trembled in fear as they waited to hear their fate. When the Duke asked about the matter he had entrusted, Allan replied in one breath that his lord had instructed them not to look for him or disturb him because he wanted to take a walk alone. But the Duke said that was not what he was asking about. So Allan answered that that matter was nearly dealt with. However, the assistant suggested handling these vile wretches who had dared insult the Duke first. The frightened old man struggled for quite some time before finally managing to piece together a few complete sentences, trying to offer the proper formal greeting to that lord as etiquette required. But Rashid interrupted him, saying that he wanted to see Marcel in person. With an arrogant look on his face, the Duke repeated the butler's own words back to him and added that he wanted to personally confirm Marcel's current condition. Naturally, the butler could not allow such a thing to happen. Next, Allan brought up the matter of compensation. The man immediately declared that they had no need to worry on that front at all. However, the assistant clearly had no intention of letting them off so easily. Allan pressed further about the young master's words concerning beating the Duke. At that, the butler instantly began flatly denying everything and pushed all the blame on his Senna, saying that she alone would have to pay the compensation. That left the heroine both confused and furious. She did not accept those accusations and did not believe she had any obligation to pay compensation at all. Just then, the Duke cut off their argument and said he would pay the money on Senna's behalf. The girl looked at the Duke, utterly unable to understand what he was trying to do. The butler had originally intended to get the money from the heroine. However, after seeing the Duke's expression, he did not dare object and could only agree to let the Duke pay. But Senna did not agree. The Duke was the very last person she wanted to owe anything to. She had already imagined Rashid forcing her to sell her house to repay the debt, so she firmly declared that she would never borrow money from him. Besides, she did not accept that amount of compensation in the first place. So, in a calm and orderly tone, she demanded that the butler take her to Marcel so she could see with her own eyes just how badly he was injured. She refused to accept the butler's refusal and said that if he would not agree, then she would go find Marcel herself. Senna rose from her seat and walked toward the exit. The butler immediately chased after her and blocked her path. While they were arguing, the Duke suddenly spoke. Turning to Senna with a somewhat hurt expression, he reminded her that she herself had said that since they had shared a cell, they were in the same boat. The girl was instantly speechless, not knowing how to respond, because that really was exactly what she had said. Even the assistant was quite surprised by the Duke's behavior. Allan asked worriedly whether he was feeling unwell somewhere. The Duke ordered Allan to calm down. In the end, they negotiated the amount down to 600,000 rupees. But the girl was sure Marcel was not seriously hurt at all. And for her, the worst part was that the Duke was still the one who paid it. She was very worried about her house. So she suddenly turned to the Duke and said that she would not sell it. But Rashid had no idea what she was talking about. So Senna explained further that she meant her house and that she would never sell it to the Duke. When the Duke replied that she should never have sold it in the first place, the girl was left speechless. The Duke repeated her words once more and added that she had absolutely no reason to worry about that. And when she asked why he was doing this, he answered that he only wanted to make amends for having offended her in the past. He also promised that he would never come to her again over the matter of buying the house. The girl had never expected this. She could not believe that the Duke had simply handed over the money like that. After their conversation ended, Rashid took his leave. Only then did Senna realize that the Duke had merely walked her home on his way. Watching the man's departing figure, she could not make sense of what any of it meant. The next day, she was once again awakened by a loud commotion. The noise was coming from right below her window. She went over to take a look. A crowd had gathered in front of Ellen's house. When Senna spotted the police there too, she could not help worrying about her neighbor. She immediately got herself ready and rushed out of the house. She ran with all her might, wanting only to get to Ellen as quickly as possible. But there were already many people gathered near the house. Everyone was whispering that something terrible had happened. Panicking, she grabbed one of the women and asked what had happened at the flower shop. The woman answered that a thief had broken into the house. Then suddenly, a terrified scream rang out, and someone shouted that there was blood. Those words nearly made it impossible for the heroine to breathe. Someone was being carried out on a stretcher, and there really was blood on it. Senna was horrified, and her thoughts had already begun racing toward the worst possible conclusion. She rushed toward the policeman carrying the stretcher, only to be stopped at once. But she shoved past them and ran straight over. Once she got close to the stretcher, she yanked away the white sheet covering the person beneath it. Lying there was a policeman with a head injury. The girl was stunned because she had been certain it was Ellen on the stretcher. A little while later, as she and Ellen shared tea, the other woman laughed about it for quite some time. Senna, embarrassed, mumbled that she had simply been too worried. Then her neighbor said with a smile that she was perfectly safe and completely fine. Even so, the heroine still did not understand what exactly had caused that uproar in the morning. Ellen explained that the man on the stretcher was one of the officers who had come after she reported the break-in. But as soon as he entered the house, he stepped on the water she had spilled on the floor, slipped, and injured himself. That injury had caused the whole scene, and that was why his face had been covered. The absurdity of the situation struck the girl as so ridiculous it was almost laughable. After finishing her tea, Senna asked whether they had caught the thief in the end, but unfortunately Ellen replied that the thief had already escaped through the window before the police arrived. She said with a laugh that the thief had probably realized there was nothing worth stealing in her house, so he had run off. In any case, the heroine was just glad her neighbor was unharmed. Ellen smiled and said that she had actually been lucky, because if a criminal had entered her bedroom while she was asleep, it would have been far more dangerous. Suddenly, Senna began to wonder whether this burglary incident had happened in the original story. Then she started thinking about how things might have turned out if she had agreed to sell her house to the Duke back then. Senna thought that if she had done that, then when someone broke into Ellen's house intending to steal, all Ellen would have had to do was scream, and the Duke would have burst out to save her that very instant. If that happened, he would have immediately won Ellen's heart. In her mind, Senna vividly pictured the Duke rescuing Ellen with a gentle smile, while the girl gazed at him with eyes full of love. At that thought, the heroine felt relieved that she had not sold the house. Seeing the worried look on her face, Ellen assumed she was still concerned about her and hurriedly reassured her, saying she was truly fine, especially since she had always known from the start that this was not exactly the safest neighborhood. Senna knew that herself too. The place did have a rather gloomy feel to it. Then it suddenly struck her that it was precisely in a bad neighborhood like this that incidents were most likely to happen. In other words, this was the ideal place to put a heroine, because in a place like this, she would always be running into trouble. realizing that she also understood that if Ellen kept getting entangled with those main male characters, she could end up in danger. She could not help worrying whether Dion alone would really be able to protect Ellen. Suddenly, Ellen gently took Senna's hand and, with a sincere smile, said she was happy to have a neighbor by her side. Senna felt a little embarrassed by those words. Then Ellen added that some of the other neighbors had come to check on her as well. Being surrounded by so many kind people was truly a blessing to her. Hearing that, Senna relaxed, but then she suddenly sensed someone nearby, so she hastily said goodbye to her neighbor and prepared to go check. Ellen was surprised by her abrupt behavior. Not wanting to worry her, Senna lied and said she had suddenly remembered something urgent, which was why she was in such a hurry. Before leaving, she reminded her neighbor to make sure to keep the doors locked at all times. Ellen bid her farewell with a smile. After Senna left, Ellen was still admiring how kind she was. As for the heroine, the moment she stepped outside, she immediately chased after the suspicious person who had been secretly watching her and Ellen. The stranger instantly realized he was being followed and turned to run, but Senna almost immediately caught up to him and demanded to know who he was. She sped up and reached out to grab him, and with her excellent agility, the girl leapt forward and caught up with the stranger in a single bound. She landed right in front of him. Senna subdued the stalker with ease. He cried out in pain and struggled desperately to wrench himself free from her grip. The girl sharply demanded to know who he was. The man shouted that it was him, but she had no idea who he meant, nor did she understand why he had been following Ellen. Then the man said his name, Allan. For a moment, Senna still did not remember. The assistant was shocked by her reaction, considering they had only met yesterday. Hearing that, she finally began to recall something vaguely. Then, all at once, she realized who he was. The moment she understood that this man was the Duke's assistant, she jumped in surprise. Once she recognized Allan, she let him go. After that, the two of them went together to the house the Duke had recently purchased not far from Ellen's home. Allan spoke first. He hurriedly explained that he was neither a stalker nor a thief. Senna did not know how to respond, so all she could do was get an awkward smile. Then Allan added that they had been the ones who scared the thief away yesterday and called the police. Hearing that, the girl finally understood why the burglars had fled so quickly. The Duke's assistant said that the criminals had been terrified the moment they saw them and had immediately run off. He was immensely proud of both his master and himself. Then the girl cut off Allan's excited explanation and pointed out that what he called watching over and protecting Ellen was, in fact, nothing more than spying and stalking. Faced with the girl's accusation that the Duke was spying on Ellen, the assistant hurriedly defended him, insisting that his master was absolutely not that kind of person and that Senna had misunderstood everything. Allan tried his best to justify his master's behavior, explaining that Miss Ellen was very important to the Duke, which was why he wanted to stay nearby and protect her. However, the more flustered and talkative the assistant became, the more suspicious he looked. In any case, Allan was glad that the young lady was safe, though he still felt regretful because the view from their side was not very good, so they had failed to notice the thief entering the house right away. The moment Senna understood what Allan was implying, she immediately declared that she would not sell her house. She stressed once again that she absolutely would not sell it. After finishing their conversation, the heroine said goodbye and left. Once she got home, she kept replaying her meeting with the assistant in her mind. To her, everything about it was too strange. And on top of that, the assistant had kept stammering while he spoke, which was suspicious too. After all, that was obviously one of the signs of extreme nervousness, and aside from that, he had never once explained what exactly the Duke was to Ellen. Looking out the window, she could not help cursing inwardly at all the creepy men tangled up with Ellen. From her house, she could clearly see not only Ellen's home, but also the Duke's house. The lights there were still on, which meant he was making his subordinates stay up through the night just to keep watch on Ellen. Under the circumstances, it was hard to believe there was not some ulterior motive involved. Suddenly, a scream rang out, and the lights in the Duke's house went out as well. Hearing it, the girl could not help worrying. Because it had sounded like Rashid, she immediately grabbed a knife and ran over to help. No matter how suspicious the Duke's actions were, Senna could not simply ignore the man who had paid off her debt for her. When the girl arrived at the house, she found that everything had gone quiet again. Although she felt she might have come for nothing, she still decided to go inside and check. Strangely, the door was open, and she entered with ease. A sweet fragrance hung in the air. Then suddenly, she heard some kind of sound again. That sensation was familiar to the heroine. She hurriedly rummaged through her pocket. After pulling out the device, she saw that its indicator was glowing red. Even so, thinking of the Duke still being inside, she stuffed the device back in her pocket and hurried to look for him. At last, she found him, but the Duke looked nothing like his usual self. He was crouched in the corner of the room, trembling in fear. Clearly, the man was completely out of sorts. He was in the middle of a panic attack, both hands clamped over his ears as he desperately tried to shut out the sound around him. His mind was in total chaos, and he was muttering something, but the words coming from his mouth were disjointed and meaningless. Seeing this, Senna tried to calm him down, but her efforts had no effect. The Duke was utterly unable to register the reality around him. In the end, she had no choice but to take extreme measures. After taking a hit from her, Rashid finally snapped back to his senses. At first, he still looked dazed. Then he flew into a rage. Hearing the man furiously accuse her of not warning him beforehand that this place was haunted, the girl was utterly dumbfounded. After calming down a little, the man continued lamenting that if he had known there were ghosts here, he never would have stayed alone in the house. In an attempt to lighten the mood a little, the heroine tried to joke it off and suggested they find the source of the sound. But the Duke was still frightened. He had no desire whatsoever to deal with ghosts. Then the girl suddenly realized something. Looking at the man's reaction, she understood it at last. The Duke was afraid of ghosts. The man's face flushed red from embarrassment and irritation as he desperately denied it. But the more he denied it, the less convincing he seemed. After that, Senna once again proposed that they go together and find out where the sound was coming from. The idea made the Duke shudder all over. But in order to prove his courage, he still nodded in agreement, his face pale. Once he gave his answer, Senna motioned for him to follow her. The two of them headed toward the direction the sound had come from. After passing through an empty hallway, they arrived in front of several doors. While the Duke was fearfully imagining what might be behind them, the girl had already boldly pushed one open. At that moment, the man tried to calm himself and gather his thoughts. Behind the door was an empty room, but the man never saw it, because the instant she opened the door, he had turned his head away in panic. Noticing that, Senna decided to tease him a little. Only after confirming that there was no ghost behind the door did the Duke finally open his eyes. Realizing how pathetic he must have looked just then, he hurriedly straightened his appearance. Avoiding her gaze, the Duke suggested that they check the other room since this one was empty. Senna immediately agreed and continued walking ahead. As she led the way, she was nearly unable to hold back her laughter, while still unable to understand why. If the Duke was this frightened, he had not simply ordered her to inspect all the rooms by herself and instead insisted on following along. When they reached the next room, the girl felt that the sound had most likely come from there. When they opened the door, they found stairs leading downward. Then the Duke nervously asked Senna whether she was not seriously planning to go down into the basement. Deciding to stop teasing him, the heroine suggested that he stay there while she went down alone to check. But the man objected. He was worried that there might be something even more terrifying and dangerous down there than ghosts. Although the sight of him trembling all over while stubbornly trying to act brave and protect her was rather comical, that chivalrous spirit was still worthy of respect. Senna tried to reassure him, reminding him that she was actually quite a capable hunter, but the Duke still felt it was unsafe for her to go alone. To persuade him, Senna said that if anything happened to her, this house would become his. The man was startled by those words, because he had never once considered such a thing. The Duke could not understand why she would think that way. Realizing he had taken her words seriously, Senna laughed and said she had only been joking. Even though the man got angry because of it, the heroine had her own reasons for making that kind of joke. But the Duke was absolutely furious because there should be limits to everything. At the same time, that was exactly the reaction Senna wanted. After all, no matter what, raging in anger was better than trembling in fear. In any case, the girl suggested that the man wait there while she checked the basement first. The farther she went in, the darker it became around her. Soon, she could no longer see anything at all. Fortunately, she had a mana stone with her. Using the mana stone to light her way, she reached the door, but by then the noise had already stopped. Noticing this, the Duke quickly suggested they go back. Since the sound had vanished, it meant there was probably nothing wrong now. But Senna was stubbornly insistent. She bravely continued forward, while the Duke followed behind her, still trying to talk her out of it. Senna was getting rather annoyed by his constant attempts to dissuade her. She suddenly yanked her hand back and irritably told him to let go of her. For a moment, the man looked both confused and frightened. Seeing that expression on the Duke's face, Senna could not help bursting into laughter. Looking at his flushed face, it was hard to believe he was the very same man known as a vicious monster. Senna suddenly dropped her smile and said in a serious tone, looking straight into the man's eyes, she told him that whatever was down, there was not a ghost. Then she added that it was actually a demon, which startled him even more. To prove her point, she took out a device with a red stone set in the center and explained that it reacted to demons. After putting it back in her pocket, she went on to say that the faintly sweet smell filling the whole house was also evidence. After hearing the girl's explanation, the Duke asked how a demon could possibly have passed through the capital's barrier. Senna did not know the answer to that herself, but she already had some guesses about what kind of demon they were dealing with. But before they could reach the source of the sound, a force suddenly shoved the girl down the stairs. Rashid tried to catch her. He yanked the girl toward himself, trying to stop her from falling. As a result, the mana stone in her hand flew out, and the two of them lost their balance and toppled backward together. The man anxiously asked whether Senna was hurt, but she had not even figured out what had happened yet, nor did she understand why the Duke had pulled her back so hard. She stared at him with wide eyes, completely bewildered. After coming to her senses, she sprang to her feet and demanded to know what the Duke thought he was doing. The man then explained that just now it had been nothing more than a gust of wind from nowhere, but that made no sense at all because they were in a sealed space with no windows. Ignoring the Duke's concern, the girl kept moving forward, deciding to find her mana stone first. The stone had rolled into the basement and come to a stop beside a blonde girl. Only when Senna got closer did she realize that the girl looked like a creepy version of Ellen. At a single glance, she knew it could not possibly be her neighbor. Following behind the heroine, the Duke also entered the basement. The moment he saw that beautiful yet evil copy of Ellen, he was badly frightened. Senna immediately caught the trace of fear on Rashid's face, and of course she had no intention of wasting such a perfect chance to tease the Duke. The heroine immediately put her acting skills to use, pretending that her back hurt and asking the man to pick up the stone for her. The moment he heard that request, his face turned even paler. Every part of him resisted the idea, yet because of the guilt in his heart, he could not bring himself to refuse. So he could only drag his trembling legs toward the mana stone. The girl was already on the verge of losing control and could only stifle a laugh under her breath. The Duke finally made it to the stone, so happy about it that he did not even notice something floating above his head. At the sight of it, the smile suddenly vanished from the girl's face. When the Duke noticed that, he became even more frightened and hurriedly asked the heroine what was wrong. Suddenly, the thing drew close to the Duke and kept repeating the same question, demanding to know why he had killed her. It looked like a ghost in a black robe. Strings of blood-red footprints appeared all around them, and then a female ghost wearing a sinister smile suddenly dropped down as if she were about to pounce on the Duke. Realizing that Duke Kalman had gone rigid with terror, Senna quickly called out to him, trying to snap him out of it. The moment she recognized it as a demon, she rushed toward the Duke, but the man had already begun to panic. He was trembling non-stop from bone-deep fear, utterly oblivious to everything around him. In a shaking voice, he kept repeating that it was Serena. Meanwhile, the red-eyed, hideous-faced demon was rapidly closing in. When Senna looked at the ghost again, she noticed that its eye color was the same as the Duke's. Demons naturally stirred up fear and panic in people. And to make matters worse, the ceiling was also on the verge of collapsing. Senna tried to get the Duke out of there first. The moment they crossed the threshold, both of them fell to the ground together. At that very same instant, the ceiling came crashing down. At this point, the Duke recovered a little of his senses, but he was still in shock. And just outside the door, the demon, still wearing the form of that eerie woman, was hanging from a gallows. Her sinister laughter echoed through the basement. Hearing it, the Duke fell into a daze once more, repeatedly muttering that he had not killed her. After walking up to him, the girl placed both hands on Rashid's shoulders and calmly told him that everything he was seeing right now was not real, that it was only an illusion, so there was no need to be afraid. Meeting his eyes, she added with a smile that if he just closed his eyes and waited a little, she would be back very soon. The Duke still could not fully distinguish reality from illusion. He thought of Serena in her soft pink dress, her long hair once fluttering beautifully in the wind. All at once, the line between reality and fantasy began to blur. He thought the girl was still alive and kept calling her name as he walked toward her step by step. His footing was unsteady, but at the same time he felt joy that the girl was still alive. He did not want to believe that she was dead, but from beginning to end, Serena never turned around. Suddenly, the sway of her hair grew more and more violent, as if it were getting longer with every passing second. In the next moment, she whirled around, and the fairy tale world shattered instantly. That horrifying face and gloomy voice continued to accuse the Duke of causing her death. The man kept defending himself, repeatedly saying it was not him. Unexpectedly, at that moment, Senna came back with good news. She said she had caught a small demon, and once again explained that everything the Duke had been seeing was nothing but an illusion. She opened her palm to show him her catch, and explained that it was an avaricus, a rather rare kind of demon. She went on in detail about how those little things operated, how they dug nightmares out of their victims, and then projected those nightmares into reality as illusions. Remembering that this kind of demon especially liked to eat fingers, the girl quickly checked the Duke's hands. Senna added that the gust of wind from earlier had only been one of the little creature's tricks as well. Still shaken, the Duke asked only one question. How exactly had Senna defeated the demon? The girl explained that, because she was a hunter, she specialized in dealing with mind-controlling demons like this. The Duke still had not fully recovered from the nightmare he had just endured. Noticing his pale face and unnatural reaction, Senna worriedly asked Rashid whether he was really all right. The Duke answered that he was fine and tried to stand up, but the next second his face ended up almost right in front of Senna's nose. Only then did he finally notice the girl's gentle smile. And it was only at that moment that he realized the heroine was not as forceful as he had imagined. On the contrary, she was very kind and cute. The Duke instantly grew a little embarrassed. Seeing his reaction, however, Senna was utterly baffled and had no idea what he was thinking. But now that the demon had been caught, the girl stood up from the ground and suggested they head back. With a charming smile, she let the man take her hand and help her up. The Duke stared, slightly entranced. He agreed and took Senna's hand. As morning arrived, the townspeople began talking excitedly among themselves. Some neighbors had heard the huge crash, and some had even thought there had been an earthquake. But Senna quickly reassured them, explaining that the floor had simply collapsed because the house was old to begin with. The neighbors readily accepted that explanation. After hearing the rumors, a deeply worried Ellen ran over to the heroine to make sure she was unharmed. When she heard that the floor had collapsed, she looked very upset. Senna told her the same thing she had told the other neighbors. But suddenly Ellen's expression changed, and in a serious tone, she asked Senna why she was in the Duke's house. The heroine came up with an excuse on the spot, answering that she had been helping with the move. Hearing that, Ellen still wore that same smile as she said she was glad to know Senna had not been hurt. After speaking with the heroine, she quietly glanced toward the Duke. At that moment, their eyes met. Noticing that, Ellen said goodbye to the neighbors and then left. At last, the surroundings grew quiet again, and Senna let out a sigh of relief. But before they could enjoy the peace, Allan suddenly came rushing out from who knew where and ran toward his master with all his might. Anxiously, he asked what on earth had happened. Not wanting to retell the entire incident from the beginning, the Duke simply showed him the thing and told him to study it, but his assistant had no idea what he meant. So Rashid called for Senna. The girl immediately understood what he meant and started rummaging through her pocket. She pulled out a tiny B-shaped demon and handed it to Allan. The Duke also signaled for his assistant to take the demon away. Looking at the little creature in his hand, Allan still had plenty of questions, but the Duke ordered him to return to the manor first and study it, and also to send for a doctor. At first, Senna did not understand why a doctor was needed, but once she realized, she froze. The Duke was personally cleaning her wound. That made the girl very uncomfortable, and she hurriedly snatched the towel, saying she could handle it herself. The Duke continued looking at her, but to Senna, burns like this were commonplace whenever she used a mana stone. After all, she was the sort of person who was unaffected by magic. Normally, When people used magic through a stone, the stone would turn black once its mana was exhausted. But Senna had created her own method of using mana stones. She would force the mana inside the stone to leak out rapidly, then use it like an explosive. Usually, an explosion would kick up dust, but it could also hit the target in a single strike. It was actually a fairly effective hunting method. As Senna rubbed her hand, she kept thinking about the demon they had just caught, while the Duke silently watched her. Suddenly, he asked whether this sort of thing happened often. The girl calmly answered yes, because she was a hunter. But what surprised Rashid most was when Senna said she no longer owed him anything, because he had no idea what debt she was referring to. So the girl explained that she meant the day the Duke helped get her out of prison. After hearing that, the Duke smiled in agreement and thanked her for saving him. He added that from now on, the girl could rely on his help. However, when he heard Senna ask him to share whatever information Allan uncovered, he was greatly surprised. Even though he had promised to grant any request she made, this time he refused. He could not explain the reason for his refusal, but in exchange, he promised to fulfill any other wish she had. The girl stood firm, emphasizing that she needed that information, but the Duke was equally resolute. Senna had no intention of backing down either, because the very fact that a demon had appeared in the capital was reason enough to be concerned. Even so, that argument still was not enough to sway Duke Allan. After being refused again, the girl truly became angry. Just then, Allan returned with the doctor, interrupting their conversation. However, the moment he stepped inside, he immediately sensed the oppressive tension between the two of them. It made both the assistant and the doctor feel uncomfortable and awkward. They froze in place, not knowing what to do in such a situation. And when they heard the girl angrily shout that everything was fine, they both flinched. The Duke still wore an unreadable expression, as if his entire body was saying that there was no point in arguing any further. After the conversation ended, Senna still had the doctor give her some basic first aid. On the way home, she kept thinking over and analyzing everything that had happened over the past few days. She especially could not stop thinking about the demon that had managed to pass through the royal capital's barrier. Suddenly, she sensed someone standing behind her. Senna quickly spun around to see who it was, since they had managed to come so close without making a sound. But before she could even react, the stranger grabbed her injured arm, making her frown in pain. Then, in a worried voice, the person asked if she was all right. It turned out to be Dion. For some reason, though, instead of relaxing when she saw him, the girl only felt awkward. The memory of that night resurfaced in her mind. For a brief moment, she even went pale from nervousness. Dion had no idea why she was reacting that way, and only became more flustered, thinking her injuries must be serious. Senna could not help thinking that the man before her looked completely different from how he had been that night, as if they were two different people. After gathering her thoughts, she forced a smile and said it was only a minor injury. But that answer did not satisfy him. He was still worried and pressed her for details. At that moment, Senna remembered that Dion was the guild leader's son and guessed that he might have heard something about demons. Taking the opportunity, she invited him to talk. The two of them then went to a restaurant to continue the conversation there. Senna showed with her whole body just how much she liked the food. Seeing her reaction, Dion looked happy too. During lunch, they talked about the demon that had appeared in the royal capital. Unlike the Duke, Dion immediately said that if he learned anything, he would tell her. Watching his refined and elegant behavior, Senna still could not understand what exactly had happened that night, nor could she be sure whether that arrogant man had really been Dion. Just then, Dion suddenly brought up the Duke himself. He told Senna not to keep helping Rashid and to stay away from him if possible. But she could not agree to that because the Duke was her neighbor and he had also helped her before. She even said that the Duke was not actually that bad. Besides, when a thief had broken into Ellen's house last time, his people had helped too. However, this was the first time Dion had heard about that incident. So Senna told him the whole story and added that there was nothing to worry about anymore, since Ellen was safe. But just then, Dion suddenly asked whether she was all right. The question caught her off guard, since the thief had broken into her neighbor's house, not hers, so she answered that of course she was fine as well. The girl then asked whether he was going to visit Ellen, and Dion replied that he was not sure yet. Still, he looked somewhat troubled. Senna took that expression as concern for Ellen, and because of that, she once again became convinced that his feelings for Ellen were genuine. In irritation, she thought that if all of this was really just an act, then his acting skills were far too good. Just then, the man's expression suddenly changed. He invited the girl to eat the food on her plate that he had already cut up for her since her hand was injured. Delighted, she began eating in big bites, touched by Dion's thoughtfulness. In the end, what mattered most to her was how this person treated her. Even if he had another side to him, somehow it did not seem to matter. Dion looked at Senna with obvious delight. After lunch, he asked what she planned to do next, and the girl said she would probably go to the library to look into information about the demon that had appeared in the royal capital. The man then offered to help, but she hurriedly refused, too embarrassed to rely on him that much. Yet Dion, with a dazzling smile, reminded her that her arm was injured, so she would probably need his help after all. Senna also felt, to some extent, that he had a point, so after thinking it over for a while, she agreed. After lunch, the two of them went to the library. Senna walked ahead, while Dion followed behind, though that had not been part of her original plan. She had intended to ask the guards instead. However, if she brought Dion along, she would stand out too much, and in the future, he might even be able to help her meet the mages in the Adventurers Guild. At that thought, she gave a faintly mischievous smile and began planning ahead. When they arrived at the library, the librarian received them and asked them to show identification. Senna took out her D-rank hunter card. Dion showed his identification as well. The moment the librarian saw his handsome face, she stared blankly for a second, but she quickly came back to her senses and said there was no problem with the documents and that they could go in. However, she addressed Dion as Russell Dow. The moment she heard that name, Senna turned a suspicious look on the man beside her. Smiling, the librarian pointed out where the books on their subject could be found. Senna and Dion headed in the direction she indicated. As they walked between the shelves, the man remained silent the entire time. Meanwhile, the girl waited for his explanation. With every silent step they took, her suspicions only deepened. Her suspicion finally reached its peak. She even came to the conclusion that Dion's identity might be fake. Sensing the man looking at her, she turned to face him. Under his gaze, she felt a little uncomfortable and asked what was wrong. Her heart skipped a beat, thinking Dion was finally about to confess his true identity. After hesitating for a long time, the man said, as if he had made up his mind, that he wanted to tell her the truth. The girl stood there holding her breath, waiting to hear it. But then Don, whose face had suddenly turned red, confessed that he hated libraries from the bottom of his heart. Obviously, this was not the truth Senna had been expecting. Then, somewhat embarrassed, Dion explained that whenever he looked at books, he got sleepy, and he asked the girl not to leave him behind by himself. The request left her somewhat blank, but she still agreed. To ease the awkward atmosphere a little and keep the conversation going, Senna cautiously asked whether Dion did not like books very much. The man immediately replied that it was not that he did not like them very much. He hated them outright. Senna was utterly speechless at how seriously Dion took the matter. Then the girl directly asked who Russell Dow was. The question caught the man off guard, and the girl also realized she had said too much, so she quickly covered her mouth with her hand, as if that could somehow take back the words already spoken. Realizing she was asking about the hunter identification he had just shown, he calmly began to answer. He said that identification had been made according to his father's wishes, and that he himself did not know whose name it had originally been. Senna did not trust that answer, so she asked in return whether it would not be more convenient just to use his real name. Dion replied that of course she was right, but he had never been officially registered as a hunter. The reason was that many people were wary of him because he was the guild leader's eldest son, and for that very reason, they did not want to let him become a hunter. Senna had never imagined such a thing, but when she thought about the fact that his father had even made a fake identification for his son, she felt that the guild leader actually cared about him quite a lot. The man himself, however, did not seem so sure. At that moment, the heroine noticed that every time the guild leader came up, his mood immediately worsened. So she decided not to talk about the guild leader anymore, and instead began looking for the book she needed. But her hand hurt more than she had expected. Noticing this, Dion reached out and took down the book she had chosen for her. At that moment, he looked like a handsome prince straight out of fairy tale. Senna accepted the book and thanked him. It was a work by Elliot Luffman about psychic-type demons. The heroine explained that this scholar writer had spent his entire life tracking and studying demons, and that he had been the first to compile a demon encyclopedia. She excitedly went on to say that the demon they had encountered in the basement last night had also been a psychic-type demon. After listening to the girl, Dion began reading the open page of the book. There, the author described his encounter with a female demon, writing that when she cast her spell, his entire body froze in place, as though even his feet had rooted themselves into the ground. Dion continued reading the passage aloud, and according to the text, the female demon then ran the tip of her tongue across the scholar's lips and slowly traced her bright red nails over his thigh. But the moment she heard that, Senna abruptly snapped the book shut, stopping him from reading any further. The girl went pale with shock, and only after looking again at the cover did she notice the subtitle, which said the book was a study of the seductive allure of succubi. She was so embarrassed that she could not even bring herself to glance in the man's direction. Meanwhile, Dion was looking at her with a gentle and kindly smile. Senna's mind went blank from shame, and her whole body stiffened, so the man softly called out to her. To help her relax a little, he even praised the author, saying that the scholar had probably truly devoted himself to his research. Although Senna was still so embarrassed she wanted the ground to swallow her up, she still agreed with Dion's assessment. But she was far too mortified, so she simply hid her face behind the book and asked the man to sit somewhere and wait for her while she looked into the material herself. After blurting out everything she wanted to say in one breath, she did not even wait for his response and quickly ran off. Dion did not even have time to react. After getting away from him, Senna began viciously cursing Elliot Luffman in her heart for putting her through such humiliation. After all, she had admired him so much, listening to all those stories about how the scholar had risked his life for science. Yet in the end, he had devoted one of his books to succubi and even described in detail his encounters with them. Once she had calmed down a little, the girl finally realized that she was still clutching that book tightly. The moment she noticed, she also thought of how her behavior just now might have created a terrible misunderstanding. For her, it was a devastating blow. That kind of misunderstanding was exactly what she had wanted to avoid most. But worrying about it now was useless, because that man had clearly already gotten the wrong idea about her. So Senna decided she might as well start reading the book. After flipping through a few pages, she found that although the contents were vulgar, there was indeed some useful information in it. Moreover, the author had organized all the material very clearly. After turning a few more pages, Senna finally found the page she needed. It contained information about the demon she had caught the previous night. Although there was not much there, according to the book, this kind of demon was uncommon in the region where Senna lived, and it was not powerful enough to break through the royal capital's barrier. From this, the girl reached a conclusion. Someone had deliberately captured it and then released it there. As she read, time flew by. After finishing her research, Senna felt it was about time to head back, and when she stood up, she only then noticed that it was already dusk outside. She began looking around for Dion. When she found no one nearby, the girl ran in the direction where they had separated. As she ran between the shelves, she noticed a man wearing a cloak. The stranger's purple hair caught her attention. She remembered that Dion had said there had once been a suspicious man stalking Ellen. So Senna immediately suspected that the person before her was that unidentified stalker. Just as the heroine was staring at him, the suspicious man hurried away. She followed him and saw the stranger enter the restricted section. The unease in her heart grew even stronger. After all, it was very possible that this mysterious person had been watching Ellen all this time in order to harm her. So, to protect her neighbor, Senna began keeping a close eye on the suspicious man. But he only kept walking between shelves. Since magic was forbidden inside the library, Senna was certain that if it really came to a fight, she would be the one to win. The stranger suddenly changed direction, and the girl turned as well, but in the very next instant, the man started heading back again. The moment she noticed that, Senna immediately stopped walking. To avoid being discovered, she also decided to turn away, but the footsteps kept getting closer. Panicking, the girl hurriedly looked around for somewhere to hide. Seeing that she had no more time, she had no choice but to decide to hide behind a bookshelf. But before she could run off, someone suddenly grabbed her hand. An unknown force violently yanked Senna over. Terrified, she struggled desperately, trying to shake the person off. But the moment she heard Dion's voice, she immediately calmed down. When she turned around, she saw Dion standing behind the man. The man signaled for them to be quiet and said he would explain everything later. Just then, a strange voice suddenly rang out. The purple-haired man addressed the middle-aged man as my Lord Marquee. The Marquis told him that the Duke had already begun to grow suspicious, so they had to find Ellen first. As Senna looked at Marquis Aquis, she gradually recalled the opening of the short story she had read in her previous life. According to the plot, Ellen suffered greatly while staying at the Marquis's house. So aside from Marquis Aquis himself, she called all of them bad people, since it was hard to tell whether he was truly good or bad. The reason the members of the Eccles family treated her so inhumanely was because she was an illegitimate child. Still, even though everyone hated her, one person arranged a room, clothes, food, and a maid for her. That person was Marquis Aquis. However, he never once went to see Ellen. Unlike the rest of the family, the Marquis seemed unwilling to acknowledge Ellen's existence. The other children would hit her and openly mock her, but the adults showed no reaction at all. All of it happened with the tacit approval of the head of the household. No matter how much his wife and children bullied Ellen, the Marquis never tried to stop them, but at the same time, he never tried to make her situation worse either. To him, it was as if Ellen simply did not exist. Even so, Senna could not understand why he had now decided to look for Ellen. At the same time, she became certain that the purple-haired man was the one who had been watching her neighbor all along. Suddenly, the Marquis asked an unexpected question. He asked about the flower shop girl who looked very much like Ellen, and the purple-haired man's answer was even more shocking. He said that girl was definitely not Ellen. Senna was utterly confused, but Dion reminded her to stay quiet because they were still hiding. Then the man explained to the Marquis why he had reached that conclusion. He said that the first time they went there, the girl had indeed been very kind and gentle, just like Ellen. But when they went a second time, that girl attacked the purple-haired man's subordinate and drove him away. However, that was not the only reason he was certain she was not Ellen. After hearing this, the Marquis asked what the main reason was. The man then said that when they went a third time, the girl furiously chased them off. She had swung a broom at them in a rage, cursing them out and hurling the foulest insults she could. The noble gentleman could no longer bear to listen to such vulgar language, so he ordered the man to stop, saying he had heard enough. Senna and Dion were both stunned by Ellen's behavior. The heroine recalled a recent conversation she had had with her neighbor. At the time, she had taught Ellen how to survive in this world. She had told her that in a dangerous world like this, a girl needed to know a few curse words. Senna had said a few insults and taught Ellen to repeat them if necessary. After hearing the purple-haired man's description, the heroine realized that most of what Ellen had said was what she had taught her. Still, among the things Ellen had said, there were also some swear words Senna had not taught her. Seeing Senna's expression, Dion could not help but laugh. The heroine immediately clapped a hand over his mouth and warned him in a low voice not to make a sound, or they would be discovered. After hearing the man's report, the Marquis also believed that the girl was not Ellen, because Ellen could never speak like that. Although the purple-haired man agreed, he said he still wanted to confirm it one more time. However, since Ellen had already seen him, he said he would go in disguise. With that, the man finished his report. After the two of them left, Dion laughed for quite a while and asked Senna how she had ever thought of teaching Ellen to swear. The heroine was startled and did not understand how he knew about that, but he explained that it was written all over her face. The girl then explained that she had only taught her those things for self-defense, so Ellen could use them against the Duke and his people. Even though the girl had used that knowledge in a different situation, it had still worked. That made Dion even more amused. He even said there was no doubt that it had been very effective. Embarrassed, Senna then said that if Dion liked it so much, he should pay her. The man seemed to like that idea and immediately moved to look for his wallet. Seeing that, the heroine hurriedly stopped him and explained that she had only been joking. Dion then pretended not to understand. A moment later, however, he burst out laughing again and said he had been joking too. Looking at the man's carefree smile, Senna suddenly remembered something. She asked Dion whether he was not worried. When her friend gave her a puzzled look, the girl explained that she meant the Marquis was looking for Ellen and might try to take her back. But the man did not seem very concerned. Senna felt Dion's attitude was far too careless. Then she thought about how Ellen lived right next door, and if dangerous people kept hanging around her neighbor, she would not be safe either. So Senna decided that if things really came down to it, she would kill them all. After all, what they were doing could affect her home too. Dion continued to look at the heroine with the same gentle eyes as before. Noticing his gaze, Senna asked why he kept staring at her. but the man simply replied that being with her made him feel at ease and happy, which left Senna deeply surprised. And when the heroine asked what he planned to do once all of this was over, Dion answered that he had not decided yet. The girl nodded reflexively, but then suddenly realized what he had said and asked in shock how he could not even have thought about something like that. And what about his feelings for Ellen? Dion's indifference left her completely stunned. After ending the conversation, the man stood up from the floor. He explained his behavior by saying that Ellen was safe as long as she stayed by Senna's side. Then he suggested that since they were finished with what they had come to do in the library, he should take her home. The heroine looked at him, unable to understand what on earth was going on with him. The man held out his hand, waiting for her answer. The next day, Senna decided to go to the guild and ask the clerk for advice. After hearing her friend's story, Anna guessed that either the man was no longer in love with the girl, or he had decided to forget everything and move on. The heroine still could not understand why he had made such a decision. But in order not to arouse suspicion, she decided to drop the subject for now. Watching Senna's expression, Anna smiled and asked who she was talking about. The excited heroine replied that it was her friend, but the sharp-witted clerk did not believe her. So the heroine decided to change the subject. She asked Anna whether anyone from the investigation department was in the office right now. Hearing the question, the clerk began sorting through some documents. After finding the file she needed, she said that everyone had already gone home. That seemed very strange, so Senna immediately suspected that perhaps the Duke was deliberately preventing others from contacting that department. Anna also found it odd and said maybe there had been some mistake in the paperwork. She invited her friend upstairs to wait and said that the department was on the 3rd floor. Standing at the door, the heroine hesitated about whether to go in and guessed that the door might already be completely locked. However, the door opened with surprising ease. Looking at the open doorway, Senna was astonished that things were going so smoothly. A man sitting just inside the room and flipping through documents looked at the girl and said she had come even earlier than he had expected. The moment she heard that voice, Senna instantly deflated. The one sitting in front of her was none other than Dion. He lifted his blue eyes and looked at the heroine with a smile, saying that he had been waiting for her. Hearing that, Senna was utterly shocked. Dion then reminded her that on the way home yesterday, she had told him she would stop by the investigation department. After hearing that, Senna also remembered the conversation. Even so, she still could not understand how Dion had gotten in, because normally, if no one was inside, the door would be locked. The man rose from his seat and replied that he had opened the door himself. Then he pulled something from his pocket and showed her the office key. When the girl saw someone else's name engraved on the key, her face turned pale. But Dion kept his usual smile and said he had stolen the key from a mage in the investigation department. After saying that, he handed the key to her. The girl was stunned that he could say all of that so calmly. At that moment, Senna felt that today's Dion was practically insane. They began searching through documents and reports for the information they needed. In the middle of it, the heroine asked the man whether anyone had been in the office when he arrived. Dion answered that there had not been a single person. Then Senna began to worry about what would happen to the owner of the key if someone found out that the place had been broken into. After thinking for a moment, the man answered that they would probably just get scolded by their superior. Hearing that, the heroine felt guilty toward the stranger, since that person would likely be punished because of them. So Dion suggested they finish quickly and leave. But no matter how hard they searched, they could not find the report about the demon breaking into the Duke's estate. After turning the whole place upside down, they concluded that the report had been hidden away. Since the information was that confidential, they probably would not get any results even if they asked directly. So they decided to set the report aside for now and think of another way. Then Dion suggested that they leave the place. At that, Senna asked whether she could ask him a question. After getting his permission, the heroine asked whether he had really let go of his feelings for Ellen. When he answered yes, the girl stared in shock, mouth agape. Dion added with a smile that he believed Ellen would live better with the Duke. Senna tried to comfort the man, telling him that he was a good person. Although she did not say everything she truly thought, she still gave him quite a few words of praise and said he would surely meet someone wonderful someday. Listening to the girl's gentle words, he lightly touched Senna's hand and asked whether she could make him feel better. In that moment, the man's eyes were beautiful, overflowing with tenderness. The heroine tried to respond somehow, at least a little, and said that she was not sure she could make him laugh like she had yesterday. He clearly had not expected that answer. Dion could not help laughing, and he laughed so hard that tears came to his eyes. Seeing his reaction, Senna grew even more embarrassed and, blushing, asked what she could do to help him. Still laughing, Dion answered that it was enough for her just to stay by his side. Based on what the man said, Senna took it to mean that he wanted the girl to spend more time with him, and so she concluded that what Dion needed right now was simply a friend. Taking the opportunity, the man invited the girl to go get something to eat. But the girl was busy looking for work, so she had no choice but to refuse. Seeing the disappointed look on Dion's face, the heroine tried to change the subject. But because he looked so pitiful, like a little puppy, Senna still felt guilty. After a while, they finished putting the room back in order. Everything was put back neatly, making it look as if no one had ever been there. Once they were done tidying up, Dion and Senna headed for the exit. Suddenly, footsteps sounded from outside. The heroine quickly grabbed the man and said they had to hide first and wait for the person to leave. With that, Senna warily pressed Dion back against the wall. The man felt a little embarrassed by their close proximity, but the girl's attention was focused entirely on the footsteps. After a while, the footsteps gradually faded away, and she told Dion so. Once she confirmed it was safe, she let out a breath of relief, then turned to glare at Dion in irritation. What angered Senna was that he had just been heading straight out without thinking at all about the possibility that they might get caught. Dion tried to defend himself, saying that in that situation, they could just have lied and claimed they had come there on business. But that answer did not satisfy the girl in the slightest, and she was furious, because obviously no one would ever believe such nonsense. However, the moment Senna remembered that the man standing before her was her superior's son, she forced herself to calm down. Stepping a little closer, she asked Dion as evenly as possible whether he realized how remarkably attractive he was. She went on to explain what she meant, saying that his shining silver hair, clear blue eyes, and those damnably charming features made him stand out anywhere. Even the librarian had taken quite a liking to Dion. Hearing such lavish praise of his looks, Dion could not help smiling. That only made Senna angry again, because she was trying to discuss something serious. Yet Dion was simply happy that the heroine thought he was handsome. In any case, he promised to be more careful from now on. In exchange, he asked the girl to keep her promise and stay by his side. Remembering their earlier conversation, she agreed. Senna promised that she would do her best to keep that promise. The next morning, the sleepy heroine was awakened by a knock at the door and went to open it. Standing outside was an energetic, beaming Dion. Cheerfully, he invited the girl to go eat with him. She had not expected him to come so early, but considering that it was already noon, Dion clearly had no intention of leaving. He suddenly grabbed Senna's hand and, smiling, pulled her away with him. The next day, Dion came again, only this time an hour later. With the pitiful eyes of a scolded puppy, he promised that he would not drag her off by force again. And the day after that, he still came. This time, he invited Senna to a pastry shop. For several days in a row, he showed up every day with a smile, asking the heroine to go out with him. This time, Senna realized it was useless to resist, so she simply invited Dion inside, because she still had to clean the house. The man accepted at once, thanked her, then went inside and helped dust. The heroine kept thinking about the situation in front of her, unable to understand whether Dion truly intended to come by every single day. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden knock at the door. When Senna said she was not expecting anyone today, Dion offered to answer it himself. Duke Allan was standing outside. The moment he saw him, Dion slammed the door shut. But in the end, he had no choice but to open it again and let the Duke inside. Senna felt uncomfortable because of the oppressive atmosphere between the Duke and Dion. Even so, she tried to remain calm, because this was her house. When the Duke said he had come to make Senna a proposal, Dion suddenly cut in and answered for her outright. No. Rashid was deeply displeased by Dion's rude interruption, since the Duke had not been speaking to him at all, but Dion kept arguing anyway. The two bickered for a while and even forgot, at one point, that they were in someone else's home. At last, Senna ran out of patience and reminded the two uninvited guests that this was her house. When the heroine said that if they kept this up, she would throw them out, both men immediately fell silent. Senna was very satisfied with that, because she had finally made them understand who the owner of the house was. After restoring order, she turned to the Duke and asked what exactly he wanted to propose. The Duke said that the basement of her new home was in poor condition, and not just the basement. The girl replied that this was to be expected, considering how old the house was. So the Duke announced that he intended to renovate the entire house. Hearing that, Senna began to worry about Ellen, because for the next 2 months, if the Duke was not around, there would be no one to protect her. Returning to his request, Rashid said that he wanted to rent Senna's house during the renovation period. Dion immediately objected, and even though this time was not a purchase, but only a rental, Dion still refused. Ignoring Dion's indignant objections, the Duke proposed signing a contract and paying rent monthly. He immediately took out the documents and showed her the conditions written there. Despite Dion's repeated protests, Senna decided to look over the contract first. When she saw the monthly rent, she froze in shock. The Duke smugly told her that yes, it was written correctly. He would pay a full 500,000 rubies every month. The moment she heard that amount, the girl agreed at once and even addressed the Duke as an honored guest. Rashid, too, was pleased that the girl had accepted his proposal. After making her final decision, Senna prepared to sign the contract, especially since the Duke moving in would allow him to continue protecting Ellen. But Dion was still protesting. Stubbornly, he urged the heroine not to do it, and even said that he could give her 500,000 as well, though the girl could not understand why he would do such a thing. Seeing how strongly the fellow was reacting, the Duke could not help becoming curious about the relationship between Senna and Dion. Without hesitation, the heroine answered that they were just friends. Those words struck Dion hard. He was so shocked that his face went pale. Clearly, that was not the answer he had been hoping for. The Duke, on the other hand, seemed slightly relieved. Senna had no idea what in the world was happening around her, while Dion sank into gloom over the fact that the girl saw him as nothing more than a friend. After the conversation ended, the Duke prepared to leave, leaving the contract on the table. As he walked to the door, he said that he wanted to give the girl enough time to think it over carefully, and added that she could also include her own conditions in the contract. Senna was thoroughly surprised by the Duke's behavior. Compared to when they had first met, he was acting far better now. She could not understand why he had changed so much, so she decided not to dwell on it and instead began studying the contract. Dion watched heavily as Senna revised the contract. After finishing, the girl showed the document to Dion because she wanted to hear his opinion, but he was still sulking over the just friends remark. The heroine did not really understand why his mood had worsened. Suddenly, in an aggrieved voice, he asked Senna whether she truly intended to sign that contract. After hearing her affirmative answer, he asked emotionally why she had refused before. He was referring to the time the Duke had tried to buy Senna's house. The girl answered that the situation was different now, especially since back then he had insisted on buying the house, whereas now he only wanted to stay there temporarily. But Dion remained dissatisfied and kept muttering that he could lend Senna that much money too. Hearing that, the heroine replied that it was not just about the money. What she needed was the Duke. Those words hit Dion hard. Senna then explained that it was the Duke who had helped Ellen and chased away the thieves who had broken into her house. Moreover, judging from a conversation she had recently overheard, that purple-haired man would go looking for Ellen again. If the Duke was staying in her house, he would be able to help her neighbor when necessary. Senna recalled that it was Dion who had once said Ellen would be safer staying close to the Duke. After hearing Senna's explanation, Dion finally realized that the reason the girl had accepted Coleman's proposal was because of the very thing he had said. Looking at how downcast he seemed, the heroine could not understand why his mood had sunk so badly. A few days later, the Duke actively began moving into his new residence. At that moment, Senna was standing inside the house, studying the view through the window. The girl was pleased that Ellen's house could be clearly seen from here. She felt relieved that the Duke would be able to keep watch over Ellen from here. Yet at the same time, she was confused, unable to understand why she cared so much about an ordinary neighbor. She had several guesses, but the two most reasonable were that Ellen was the protagonist of this novel, or that she simply felt sorry that her neighbor had been forced to flee that awful family. Her train of thought was interrupted by footsteps. The person who came was the Duke. He said that all of his belongings had been delivered, and after finishing their work, the workers had taken their leave of the homeowner and departed. Once the Duke's subordinates had gone, the first thing the heroine did was remind him of the clauses in the contract. When a man answered that he remembered them all, Senna decided to test whether that was really true. The Duke was thoroughly disheartened at having to repeat the contract for what felt like the 100th time, but he nevertheless began reciting each item the heroine had written into it. He reeled off all 7 conditions in one go. At the end, he even added the conditions Senna had set. If he violated even one of them, the contract would be void. After hearing Coleman's answer, Senna sincerely praised the Duke, though the praise did not seem to make him particularly happy. At that moment, Allan, in a good mood from the move, joined their conversation. However, he had a question. Since this was the assistant's first time meeting Dion, he became curious about who he was. With a faint smile, the Duke answered that he was Senna's friend. To Dion, those words were like a blow to the head. Dion barely suppressed his anger and greeted the Duke with a stiff smile. The oppressive atmosphere between them could be felt from far away. Meanwhile, Allan began explaining the arrangements for use of the house. According to the plan, the Duke would stay in this rented house 1 or 2 days a week, and on the other days, his nights would remain here instead. Having said everything he needed to say, he took his leave and hurried out of the house. The girl bid the assistant goodbye with a bewildered expression. She had no idea how to calm Dion and calm him down. Senna turned to the Duke, trying to stop the conflict, but he completely ignored her. Then she turned to Dion and asked him to stop arguing too, but that was equally useless. Realizing that neither of the 2 men was listening to her, Senna had no choice but to wedge herself directly between them to get their attention. To separate them completely, she told Dion to go home first, since it was already very late. Dion was surprised by the request, but Senna was eager to send him off so he could go home and sleep. Angry and exasperated, she blamed herself for somehow ending up with those 2 in the same room. The heroine hurriedly told him to come again tomorrow or in a few days, but just then, she suddenly discovered that the door would not open. Hearing the commotion, the Duke came over and asked what was wrong. Dion was delighted that the door was jammed and he could not go home, so the 3 of them once again ended up in the same room, seated around the same table. Senna was completely dumbfounded. She could not understand at all why the door would not open. The Duke further explained that not only the door, but even the windows would not open, making it feel as if they had been trapped inside some kind of barrier. Dion, meanwhile, was very pleased with the situation. And so the 3 sat around the round table, one very happy, one deeply depressed, and one angry. The Duke and Senna immediately thought that a demon might be behind this again. The heroine promptly took out the device and decided to verify the suspicion. When their assumption was confirmed, everyone was stunned. No one had expected it to be true. The stone in the device glowed a vivid red, which meant that a demon was hidden somewhere in the house, though there was no way to tell how long it had been there. Seeing the expression on the heroine's face, Dion grew worried and asked if she was all right. To Senna, this was a home filled with precious memories. She swore to herself that she would protect this place. Quietly, Senna rose from her seat and walked towards something. When the girl hurled herself at the window with all her strength, both men leaped up from their seats in alarm. Explaining her actions, the heroine pointed out that even after such a powerful blow, there was not so much as a scratch on the glass, which meant only one thing. The demon had trapped them here because living prey was easier to devour once confined. After a while, the temperature in the room suddenly soared. Everyone's faces turned red from the heat, and breathing became difficult. Senna managed to force out a few words. According to the heroine, all of this had been arranged by the demon. Upon hearing that this was a rather rare type of demon, Dion asked Senna how she knew that. The girl replied that she had read about it in a book. She meant the book she and Dion had found in the library. The Duke did not understand which book she meant, so Senna explained that the book had mentioned a kind of demon that liked to steam its prey before eating it. It also contained information about the demon they had found in the Duke's house. Noticing the tension between Senna and Coleman, Dion brought them water, hoping to help them cool down a little. After taking the chilled water, the heroine brightened up. When asked where he had gotten the water, Dion answered a little sheepishly that he had a few tricks up his sleeve. He even proudly showed off his magic. Senna was delighted. Someone had actually created fresh water out of thin air, and it was cool and delicious. While Dion was drinking, the girl noticed a mark like a tattoo appearing on his shoulder. After replenishing himself, Dion urged the heroine to hurry and drink too before the water lost its chill. Senna happily thanked Dion. She immediately drank the whole cup in one go. After that, she felt much better. The Duke, however, was somewhat dissatisfied, since one cup of water was nowhere near enough for him to recover. Dion did not like that ungrateful tone, so he said that if the Duke wanted water, he should ask for it properly. Rashid objected, because that would be too humiliating for him. Before the conflict could escalate, Senna cut in and reminded them that they needed to focus on finding the demon in the house. The heroine said that according to the book, this type of demon would keep hiding until they died from the heat. However, since this was her first time encountering one, she had no idea where it might be hiding. During all this, the Duke kept looking at Senna with admiration. But when their eyes met, the man awkwardly looked away. Then the girl turned to Dion and asked whether he knew anything about this kind of demon. He replied that he did not know much about demons, because he had never fought one before. At that moment, Senna realized that Dion really was strange. The only rumors about him were that he acted like a madman, and there was hardly anything else. And although Dion rarely appeared in high society, for some reason he knew the Duke. Once she realized that, she suddenly asked how Rashid and Dion knew each other. Dion answered that the first time he met the Duke was at Senna's house. Rashid, however, gave a different answer. He said they had crossed paths before, and that an acquaintance of his had mentioned Dawn. Dion asked with interest what exactly that person had said about him. The Duke replied that he had been warned to be careful of him. Dion merely gave an ominous smile and said, "I see." That smile sent a chill down Senna's spine. After ending the conversation, they began searching for the demon. With every step they took, the device reacted more and more strongly. Suddenly, the heroine stumbled. Fortunately, Dion caught her before she hit the ground. The extreme heat had completely overwhelmed the girl, and she could not even open her eyes anymore. Since she could no longer keep going, the two men decided to lean her against the wall for the moment and check the area themselves first. Even though one of the rules had been that they were not to enter the other rooms, the Duke suggested that if catching the demon was the top priority, the girl probably would not mind if they opened this door. Dion agreed, and the two of them opened the door together. The men went inside and began searching. Dion started by examining the bookshelf. Suddenly, he found an old map. Forgetting for a moment that Senna was not beside them, he turned to ask her why a certain area on the map had been circled. Seeing the Duke growing restless by the desk, Dion suddenly asked if he had seen that thing outside the room. Only then did the Duke realize that Senna was in danger. By then, an unknown black presence had already approached the girl. Realizing that the heroine was in danger, Rashid and Dion immediately rushed toward her. But by then, the demon had already swallowed Senna. There was one problem, however. The demon's body was invisible to the naked eye, so it looked as though the girl were floating in midair. The Duke drew his sword and walked toward her, guessing that the heroine must be inside the monster's stomach. He tried to determine where its head was. After estimating the general position, the Duke slashed with his sword, but he missed and only cut off its tongue. At the same time, the demon revealed its form again, but its tongue quickly grew back. Dion joined the attack as well. He cast ice magic at the demon, but the monster deftly recovered from every strike. In the end, it managed to escape. The two of them immediately gave chase, but they were already exhausted before they could catch up. Both Dion and the Duke knew that the longer this dragged on, the more likely it was that by the time they found the demon, the girl would already have been digested. To improve their chances, they decided to come up with a plan first. Dion proposed using the monster's hunger against it and having the Duke act as bait. When it opened its mouth to swallow the Duke, Dion would attack with magic. Rashid was clearly unhappy with the plan, but Dion could not think of any better idea. After thinking for a little while, the two of them came up with another option, blowing up the entire house. However, the moment they imagined Senna's reaction, they immediately rejected that option. While Dion and Rashid were busy trying to think of a way out, the Duke accidentally touched the bag of salt. As a result, the salt spilled onto the footprints the demon had left behind. Right after that, the Duke noticed some kind of reaction. Suddenly, he shouted that he had found a way. From that reaction, the Duke realized that the demon was afraid of salt. Dion looked at the ground as well and saw that the monster's saliva turned black the instant it touched the salt. Therefore, if they sprinkled salt on the demon, they would be able to see it. The remaining problem was how to make that happen. Suddenly, Dion came up with a brilliant idea, and naturally, it was not good news for the Duke. The plan was the same as before. Come, Rashid would act as bait. Dion hid nearby and waited for the demon to appear. They did not have to wait long. The plan worked surprisingly well. The demon took the bait. Just as it was about to swallow the Duke, Dion made his move. He shoved a huge bag of salt straight into the demon's mouth. While the monster howled in pain, Dion successfully retreated. Standing a little farther away, he watched the demon's reaction. By then, the Duke had already gotten back to his feet and was preparing to attack. He drew his sword and delivered a precise strike. This time, the Duke successfully cut off the demon's head. Working together, Dion and Rashid finally defeated the monster. However, no one knew what had become of Senna. Worried, Dion walked toward the demon's corpse. As they drew near, the two of them noticed that the dead monster's tail was still twitching. Sure enough, the demon had regenerative powers and had already begun growing a new head. Dion said that demons like this had a core inside them, and the only way to kill them was to remove that core from the body or destroy it outright. First, Dion immobilized the demon's body with ice magic. He also used magic to force the demon's mouth open. Then, as usual, he dumped the dirtiest and hardest part of the job onto the Duke. According to his plan, Rashid had to crawl inside and rescue Senna. The Duke was not pleased about it, but he agreed anyway. Suddenly, the ice pillar propping its mouth open cracked. Immediately afterward, the demon woke up. The moment it regained consciousness, it tried to swallow the Duke. Before Dion could even react, the monster had already swallowed Rashid. At that moment, Dion grinned and said that was exactly why he had told the Duke to hurry. After swallowing Rashid, the demon began trying to break free of its restraints. Dion then prepared another spell, this time using the fire element. A moment later, flames completely enveloped the demon's body. Dion kept launching magical attacks. At the same time, he tried to restrain the monster's movements so it would not destroy the house. After a while, the Duke found Senna. At that very moment, the demon let out a shrill scream and spat out black liquid. The Duke and the heroine successfully escaped from the monster's stomach together. The demon was still trembling in convulsions. Finally, after releasing a horrific dying scream, it collapsed to the floor. After subduing the demon, Dion walked over to Rashid and Senna. With a teasing tone, he turned to the Duke and said he had been a little slow, but the Duke had not only rescued the heroine, he had also brought out the core with him. Once the core was separated from the body, the demon completely vanished. This time, after confirming that the monster was truly gone for good, everyone finally let out a sigh of relief. Senna looked the same as before. She was still unconscious and showed no reaction at all to the voices around her. Suddenly, she lunged forward and hugged the Duke, saying she wanted to sleep a little longer. Dion tried to wake her, but it had no effect whatsoever. She only tightened her arms and clung even more firmly to the Duke. That irritated Dion to no end, while the Duke was deeply embarrassed. Realizing that Senna was doing it unconsciously, Dion calmed down a little. He pulled the girl into his own arms and said she should not be hugging some strange man, and that if she was going to hug anyone, it should only be him. The Duke could not understand why he was doing that, but did not object. After some time, the heroine woke up in an unfamiliar place. A young woman in a maid's uniform immediately came over to her and said with a smile that she had slept for so long everyone had started to worry. Seeing the confusion on Senna's face, the maid added that this was Duke Rashid's residence, and that his grace had brought her here himself. The heroine gradually remembered that she had lost consciousness because of the demon. The maid explained that the Duke had only brought her here because she had fainted and there happened to be a doctor at the estate. When the girl learned that servants had wiped her body down while she was unconscious, she was utterly shocked. After giving her report, the maid went to prepare bathwater for Senna. After bathing, the heroine changed into the dress that had been prepared in advance and left the room. Seeing Senna in that outfit, Dion shyly averted his gaze. Senna's beauty made not only Dion, but even the Duke blush. When the two men asked whether she was all right, Senna replied that she was feeling much better. Then Dion asked whether she remembered anything after she had passed out, but the girl remembered nothing at all. After hearing that answer, Dion pressed further and asked whether she did not even remember hugging the Duke. The girl's expression instantly froze in shock. Realizing that Senna remembered nothing, Dion said that she had been clinging tightly to Rashid back then. She had been so strong that it was almost excessive. Remembering it again, the Duke's face turned bright red with embarrassment. Senna, meanwhile, was too stunned to speak. Then she remembered her dream. It turned out she had mistaken the Duke for her blanket. And when she learned that she had even mumbled in her sleep that she did not want to get up and go to school, the heroine completely froze. She hurriedly bowed her head and begged forgiveness for her behavior. The Duke understood everything and felt just as awkward. After apologizing, the girl turned to Dion and said that he should have stopped her immediately. When the girl said that it must have been disgusting, the Duke looked a little dejected. Senna misunderstood the expression on his face and thought he was angry. So she started bowing repeatedly and apologizing again. Dion snickered at the side. To change the subject, Rashid invited Senna to stay for dinner. Suddenly, the heroine reached out and grabbed the Duke as if trying to stop him from leaving. But the moment she realized what she had done, she quickly pulled her hand back. It was because there was something she absolutely needed to discuss with the Duke. It had to do with the demons that had already appeared twice in the capital. Considering that she had been caught up in both incidents, Senna urgently asked him to lay everything out in the open. She did not understand why these demons always appeared near her house. But the Duke still could not tell her. He gave no explanation and simply refused. He only said that he wanted to investigate everything first. He added that he needed more time to look into it. However, to reassure the girl, the Duke promised that once he uncovered the truth, he would tell her everything. Not just her, he would tell Dion as well. Dion accepted the proposal, though he still pretended not to be especially interested. As if sensing that the conversation was over, Allan knocked on the door. After saying that, the Duke left with his assistant. As they walked down the empty corridor, Allan's eyes shone, and he hesitated several times as if he wanted to say something. In the end, mustering all his courage, he finally asked the question, whether there was some intimate relationship between the Duke and the mistress of the house. The maids, too, were looking forward to welcoming a new duchess. But the embarrassed Duke could not answer that question. Meanwhile, Senna and Dion were left alone together. Senna then asked Dion for his thoughts in a worried tone, but he answered with complete seriousness that, since this was a duke's household, the food would probably be quite delicious. Hearing that, the angry heroine immediately corrected him, saying they were talking about demons. Dion replied with a grin that he was only joking. After sitting down on the sofa, Senna continued wondering how something like this could happen in the imperial capital. After all, in the entire empire, the capital was the safest place, thanks to the combined efforts of the finest mages, hunters, and scientists, all working together to construct a protective barrier. And yet even so, the demons had somehow found a way to infiltrate it. Dion also shared what he thought about the Duke, not telling them anything. He was certain it was not a matter of distrust, but something else. For example, secrets that were dangerous simply to know. Even acknowledging that possibility, Senna was still furious, because if this involved her home, there was no way she could just stand by and do nothing. Dion was pleased by that reaction, because this was exactly the Senna he knew. Senna went on to say that demons were also the sworn enemies of hunters, so she absolutely could not allow things to continue like this. As the young woman declared that she would uncover the truth and eliminate every demon, anger, pain, and hatred appeared plainly on her face. So Dion simply answered that he understood. After saying that, he rose from his seat and prepared to leave. Senna was surprised because she had assumed he would stay for dinner too, but he excused himself, saying he had no appetite. Senna decided to remain and continue talking with the Duke. Faced with Dion's sudden departure, she stared at his back with her mouth slightly open, unable to understand why he had changed his mind so abruptly and decided not to stay. The only reasonable explanation she could think of was that she had just brought up demons. For Dion, who had never seen one with his own eyes before, they must be such revolting creatures that he had lost his appetite. Even so, she had still hoped for a gentler farewell. After such a cold departure, she even began to feel that Dion might never visit again. Senna did not want this meeting to become their last. Just then, Dion abruptly interrupted her thoughts by saying that her house had been damaged. Hearing that, Senna froze for a moment. Then he added that the damage was fairly severe. She stood there blankly, trying to process what she had just heard. When she finally understood what he meant, her face twisted with shock and anger. Meanwhile, Rashid was working in his study. However, he kept thinking about what Allan had said and could not focus on the documents at all. It was all that talkative assistant's fault. Suddenly, the head maid came to report that the guests had gone home. Rashid was disappointed that Senna had not stayed for dinner. After receiving her master's permission, the maid bowed and withdrew. Meanwhile, the younger maids were standing outside the door, excitedly discussing the relationship between the Duke and Senna. Once the maid left, Rashid could not help wondering whether he ought to marry Senna. Even he did not understand himself. Thinking back to the way that girl had panicked and apologized for the hug, saying she would never touch him again. He then imagined Dion and Senna being close and felt like an unnecessary extra. After turning it over in his mind, he regretted not having left a better first impression. Noticing his master's strange behavior, his subordinate asked what exactly was troubling him. At first, the Duke tried to deny everything, but suddenly changed his mind and instead told James to find out what kinds of gift young ladies usually like. When his assistant guessed that the gift was for the young woman he had been looking for, the Duke quickly nodded in admission, because he did not know how else to explain his concern for Senna. And only after saying those words did he suddenly realize that, during all this time, he had not thought of Allan even once. Seeing the Duke's expression, James asked again whether the gift might be meant for the wrong person, but Rashid immediately answered that it was for the right person. Even then, he still could not believe he had forgotten that matter. The moment he realized his mistake, he shot up from his desk and tried to rush to her house. But James reminded him that today was not his turn to go. And according to Allan, the Duke still had a great deal of work left to do. Hearing that, Rashid burned with anger, but in the end he had no choice but to stay and finish his work. The Duke focused on nothing else, wanting only to deal with all the documents as quickly as possible. Late that night, Dion heard a knock at the door and went to answer it. The person standing outside was none other than the Duke. Dion was unpleasantly startled, but still invited him inside. At the time, Senna was cleaning. She explained that at first the place had been an absolute mess, with demon saliva splattered everywhere. After looking around, the Duke asked whether anything had been broken. Senna happily replied that fortunately only the chest of drawers had been damaged. She also eagerly added that she had already sold the magic stones taken from the demons for a total of 400,000 rubies. She added that it was all thanks to Dion's help. Senna immediately invited Rashid to take a share, but he refused. Then she turned to Dion and asked whether he had slept uncomfortably, but he said everything had been fine. Because he misunderstood their conversation, the Duke was left speechless for a moment, but Senna's next remark, that Dion had taken a nap because he was exhausted from helping her, immediately cleared everything up. Dion, however, instantly noticed the Duke's bewildered look and began teasing him, deliberately pointing out how natural things were between the two of them. Senna, meanwhile, thought they had become closer. Dion kept smiling as he told Senna not to worry, because he had slept very well. The Duke was not surprised by that answer. After all, when Senna had been attacked by a demon, Dion had not left her side for even a second. At that time, he had looked ready to destroy every demon in his path. Yet now he seemed like a completely different person, so much so that it was hard to believe he was the same man. Senna was glad to hear that, because the room she had offered had been empty for more than 10 years. Dion was surprised to learn that, since the room was extremely neat. Senna explained that it had once been her grandfather's room, but she still cleaned it regularly, so it had remained in good condition. Hearing that, Dion apologized for causing her trouble. Senna replied a little shyly that it was all right. As they kept talking, they completely left the Duke out. At that point, Rashid offered to help with the cleaning, since he also bore some responsibility for the damage to the house. Senna felt awkward about making a nobleman do housework, but Dion quickly found a task for the Duke. Cook dinner. Senna tried to stop him, but Dion kept provoking Rashid with his words. Determined to prove that he was capable, the Duke agreed. Once he had made up his mind, Rashid headed for the kitchen, but standing before the cutting board, he had no idea where to begin. Senna was already starting to worry. She offered to help Rashid. The Duke refused at once, but Senna insisted. Rashid flushed red in the face and eventually gave in. She confidently declared that she would prepare everything. However, the Duke suggested that the two of them cook together, while Dion watched the whole thing with displeasure from the side. Senna began cooking. When she remembered that she had forgotten the butter, she decided the order of ingredients probably did not matter that much and tossed in a huge chunk of butter. Then, while it was simmering, she added a little wine. The Duke went pale with shock. What Senna was making did not look anything like beef stew. His face still pale, the Duke asked whether the dish was not supposed to be simmered over low heat, but Senna said with absolute confidence that it did not really matter. She even explained that, since everyone was hungry, they needed to cook it quickly over high heat. Then the Duke reminded her that she had not even added the beef yet. Realizing she had forgotten, she hurried to get the meat and tried to throw it in as well. But the Duke stopped her and insisted that Senna go fetch the recipe book. Although Senna was very confident in her cooking knowledge, she still went to get the book. Looking at the strange mush in the pot, the Duke thought in disgust that they would actually have to eat that later. Seeing that Senna had stepped away from the stove, Dion asked if she was already done, but she replied that she was not. The Duke just wanted to look at the recipe book. Watching her, Rashid realized that if it was something she had no interest in, she truly paid no attention to it at all. Following the recipe, the Duke successfully made an excellent dish. Rashid felt very proud of the result. Even Dion said it looked delicious. Senna also admitted that it was better than what she had made. The Duke grew a little embarrassed from all the praise and modestly said that he had only succeeded because he followed the recipe in the book. Then he set the table and called Senna and Dion over to eat while it was hot. Dion was the first to sit at the table, and he could not help remarking that he had never imagined the day would come when he would eat stew personally made by a Duke. But at that moment, another plate of unidentified matter appeared on the table. Senna proudly announced that it was the stew she had made. Dion turned pale with revulsion, but in order not to hurt his friend's feelings, he forced out a smile and said it looked good. Summoning his courage, he took a bite and even gave high praise to Senna's culinary masterpiece. Only after the tasting ended did they finally begin dinner properly. This time, Senna was the first to taste the Duke's dish, and the expression on her face already showed just how delicious it was. Dion was doubtful about the taste, but he scooped up a spoonful as well. However, the food was so delicious that the words slipped straight out of his mouth. Senna and Dion kept praising the Duke's cooking and ate with great enjoyment. Hearing that, Rashid was delighted. Smiling, he said there was still plenty left in the pot, so they could help themselves to more. The Duke was happy to share the meal with others. After all, he usually ate alone because he had neither friends nor family. After finishing the delicious dinner, Senna was in an excellent mood. She sincerely praised the Duke, saying he was truly good at everything. After the meal, the three of them went out for a walk. At night, the city came alive in a different way. But the moment they stepped outside, Senna immediately regretted not coming out alone. After all, Rashid and Dion were like two little boys, looking around with open admiration and constantly asking what this was and what that was used for. When Senna reminded them to be careful because it was easy to get lost here, the two men answered in unison that it was fine, they were not children. While thinking about the carpet she had ordered from the shop and what else she still needed to buy, Senna watched Dion and the Duke enjoying the walk. When she noticed the lamps, she remembered that the demons had broken hers, so she needed to buy a new one. Senna walked over to a vendor, intending to ask the price first, but before she could speak, Dion suddenly pointed at a statue and asked what it was. The seller replied that it was a dragon. This small figure was called the dragon that guards magic stones. Senna did not feel much about the artwork, but Dion was completely captivated by it. Noticing that he might be a customer, the vendor immediately began introducing the statue. When Dion learned that it was handmade, he leaned in admiringly to examine the details. Seeing his eyes light up, the vendor went on to tell a legend about dragons, saying that dragons could use magic. Hearing that, Dion asked how that could be possible, since everyone knew that only demons used magic. So the vendor shared one of his own theories. Perhaps demons were actually dragons. People might dislike demons, but they still use their magic. And in order for humans to have been given magic, the two races must have come into contact at some point in some way. According to his theory, that was exactly what the dragons did. After all, in every fairy tale, dragons are always kind to humans. So it was also possible that the demons had a difference of opinion among themselves, and while some chose to remain demons because they disliked humans, the others chose to coexist with humanity and became dragons. Based on all of that, the peddler guessed that not every demon was evil and savage. Dion seriously considered the man's words and said the temple probably would not accept such an idea. On the other hand, Senna had never seen a dragon before, so she had absolutely no interest in the subject. Since the conversation seemed a little dangerous, Rashid looked around, hoping no one could overhear them. But Dion thought it all sounded quite convincing. Senna was greatly surprised by that, while the peddler was delighted to find someone who shared his views. Dion found the peddler's theory extremely interesting. He went on admiring the all-powerful dragons, completely oblivious to the heroine's fierce glare. Realizing there was no longer any way to persuade Dion, Senna gave up. She decided to buy the dragon lamp. Dion was overjoyed, while Senna felt like a mother indulging a spoiled child. Just then, the young woman noticed how crowded the street was. The satisfied peddler said it was probably because a play was about to be performed nearby, and even suggested that they go see it too. At the mention of a play, Senna became interested. The story was about a girl who married a man only because he had paid off all of her family's debts. But Ulysses lay motionless in bed, showing no reaction to his wife's words. Then the girl pulled back the blanket and saw that her husband was wounded. Terrified, she did not know what to do. Ulysses told Arya to find the person who had attacked him, because he had not seen the culprit's face. At that moment, the maid behind the door announced that his sisters had come to visit their master. Arya panicked, because if those young ladies saw her in this situation, they would surely think she had killed her husband. So the young girl decided to disguise herself as her husband. Several arrogant young ladies entered the room, saying they had only come to see their brother and make sure he was well. Seeing that the sisters had noticed nothing, Arya let out a sigh of relief. But just then, a man suddenly burst into the room, shouting that the marriage had to be annulled. And the reason was quite a strong one. Ulysses was actually Arya's long-lost brother. Senna already did not like this book, and the play was not particularly interesting to her either. However, her two companions were completely absorbed in the dreadful soap opera. The girl had invited them along on a whim and had never imagined they would enjoy it so much. While everyone else was immersed in the story, the young woman remembered seeing this very same play with her grandparents 10 years earlier. Back then, she had been upset because they had taken her to the theater instead of buying her toys. The heroine regretted having acted that way. She thought that she should have smiled more that day. Noticing the sadness on Senna's face, Dion asked what was wrong. Senna answered that it was nothing and that the performance was quite good. But Dion immediately realized she was lying. So the girl decided to change the subject and asked whether he was interested in who had attacked Ulysses. Of course Dion was, but he did not want Senna to reveal everything, because then the rest would no longer be fun. Senna decided to tease her friend a little and pretended she was about to name the culprit. She had not felt this lighthearted and cheerful in a very long time. Yet all the while, someone had been watching them, and they had not noticed at all. Another bright morning arrived. Senna was furious. Rashid and Dion had brought their book over to the table and were reading while eating breakfast. By now, the two had grown quite close. Even after putting the book down, they continued discussing what they had just read. They were reading the novel version of the play they had seen the night before. When they heard that the heroine was going to the guild, both Rashid and Dion stood up to walk her to the door. Listening to their reminders, the girl was reminded of the days when her grandparents used to see her off. Thinking of those memories, the heroine smiled without realizing it. It had been a long time since she had felt this happy. When she arrived at the guild, Senna found Anna looking bored. The clerk began complaining that there had been no work lately. Senna's expression twisted in shock, because Anna herself had called her over that morning, saying there was something important to discuss. But in the end, all Anna had really wanted was someone to talk to. At that, Senna remembered that the last time she came, they had still had plenty of work to do. Anna replied that that was true, but compared to last year, it had already decreased a lot. And now that everyone had finished the remaining requests, the place was practically empty. The clerk had a feeling that winter would be unbearably dull. So for now, she had no work at all to assign Senna. Only then did the heroine realize that this was what Anna had wanted to talk about from the beginning, because she felt bad for not having any jobs for Senna. Senna smiled and comforted her friend, saying it was fine, especially since she had recently earned quite a large sum of money. Anna was happy for the heroine and asked how exactly she had made that money. So the heroine began to explain her sources of income in detail. However, after hearing that answer, Anna would probably think Senna was not quite right in the head. More precisely, that was likely what would happen if Senna told the truth. Suddenly, the girl fell into thought, because on closer consideration, the Duke was staying at the heroine's house in order to protect Allan. And that purple-haired man had said he would come looking for Allan. Only then did Senna suddenly realized that she had forgotten to warn Allan to be careful. Seeing her friend's face turn deathly pale all at once, Anna grew worried. Since she had reacted so strongly to the question about income, the clerk anxiously asked whether Senna had taken out a loan from a loan shark or gotten involved in gambling. But both guesses were wrong. Senna reassured her friend that it was nothing like that and told her not to worry. Anna then asked if that meant the heroine would not be taking requests for the time being. When Senna said that was probably the case, since she was rather busy right now, the clerk immediately assumed it was because of Dion Flavial. She eagerly tried to bring up the rumors that had reached her ears, but the heroine cut her off at once. Senna said that instead of listening to those stories, it would be better to hear it directly from the people involved. Senna felt that listening to such ridiculous gossip again would only be a waste of time. Just then, someone called out to her. Hearing the voice, the heroine turned around. It was a hunter with short black hair and blue eyes. Robin was delighted to run into Senna. Happily, he said he had some very good news to share with her. After coming closer, he pulled out a sheet of paper for the heroine to see and excitedly explained that it was a new request for them. Everyone except Senna was happy about the news. She only wanted to get home as quickly as possible. The heroine entered a room filled with sharp, shrill, heart-rending cries. A police officer who was trying to soothe a wailing baby greeted Senna. Seeing that the girl had come to help, he immediately remarked that she was very much like her grandfather, both of them exceptionally kind people. In any case, the only thing the heroine cared about was what exactly had happened here, and why the police station had turned into a shelter for lost children. The officers could not calm the children at all, and every one of them was crying. In the end, one of the policemen simply could not take it anymore and asked Senna for help. She told him to hand the child to her. The heroine explained that the child was crying because the man was holding the baby incorrectly. As she spoke, she demonstrated how to hold the child properly. The moment the child was in her arms, it quieted down immediately. One of the officers praised her for handling it so well. Senna smiled and replied, "Since when did hunters have to do this kind of work too?" After a while, everyone worked together and finally managed to get all the children to sleep. While the hunters looked after the children, Robin asked Senna whether she had any idea whose children they were. The girl replied that it was impossible to tell just by looking at them. Robin guessed that they might be the children of people the heroine knew, such as friends of her grandfather. But she said she had never heard of anything like that. Then Robin said that he had found one of the children crying in the street, and by the time he brought that child to the police station, there were already 4 others there. But not a single officer knew how to take care of children, so they had no choice but to ask the guild for help. Yet the children's parents never appeared. Considering that these children had been left on the street, they probably were not going to show up at all. Still, no matter how hard times were, it was difficult to believe that 5 children had all been abandoned overnight. It did not look like a simple coincidence. Even after returning home, she kept thinking about those children. At the same time, she consoled herself by thinking that she had already done everything she could to help. At last, she arrived home. She had assumed that Rashid and Dion would be inside waiting for her, so she opened the door happily. The moment she entered, she immediately heard Dion's voice saying that she had come back late. However, something was wrong. She looked at the guy and only then realized that he had turned into a child. Not just him, Rashid had also taken on the appearance of a child. Even they themselves did not understand what had happened. Dion said that while they were reading, at some point they had simply grown younger. Looking at them, Senna could not help laughing. Both Rashid and Dion were deeply upset. The funny part was that they had been so absorbed in the novel that they had not even noticed themselves shrinking. Dion confirmed that that was indeed true. Senna found her friend's new appearances unbearably adorable. Excitedly, she invited Dion to enter some kind of children's beauty contest, but little Dion clearly did not like that idea. Senna kept pleading, saying that he should at least let her pinch his cheeks once. Before Dion even had a chance to respond, Rashid told her to stop teasing them and hurry up and think about what had caused this. After calming down a little, Senna began thinking seriously. She also remembered the children at the police station. At that point, Rashid suggested that maybe magic was responsible, but Dion said that if it were magic, he should have been able to sense it. If that was the case, then only one possibility remained. A demon had done this. According to Senna, there really was a kind of demon with that ability, but it was treated as a legend since they were as rare as dragons. Another troubling sign was that this was already the 3rd time that demon had appeared near Senna's house. Since the demon had been mentioned in Elliot Luffman's book, the heroine decided to go to the library the next morning and read it again. Since Dion and Rashid could not return home looking like this, Senna invited them to stay at her house for the time being. Early the next morning, the heroine brought them clothes for children to wear. But because she had been in such a hurry, she got Dion's size wrong. By appearance, Rashid looked about 12, while Dion looked about 7. Senna had great fun helping Dion get dressed. Just then, someone suddenly burst into the house. Rashid recognized the person's voice at once. It was Allan, who had come running to Senna's place in search of his master. The heroine tried to make something up so as not to reveal Rashid's whereabouts, but she clearly was not very good at that. The assistant worried that the Duke had gotten into trouble again and ended up being arrested. But Senna tried to reassure him, saying that Duke Rashid would not fall into the same trap twice. Allan then happily guessed that maybe the Duke had gone on vacation. For a moment, the girl had no idea how to answer. However, the assistant did not wait for anyone to answer. On his own, he decided that his employer must be on vacation and resolved to take this opportunity to get some proper rest as well. After Allan left, the evil Duke, who had been hiding the whole time, finally appeared. Senna then suggested that they might as well tell Allan the truth, but for the Duke, this was a matter of pride. The Duke even believed that the moment the assistant saw him, he would die from sheer emotional shock. Dion quietly snickered beside him. The two of them started bickering again, like actual little children. Watching them, Senna could not even tell whether they were acting this way, because they had turned into children. In the end, she had no choice but to step in and stop the argument. The heroine reminded them that they still had to go to the library. Once they arrived at the library, they began searching through books together for information. They soon discovered that they were dealing with an S-rank demon named Leviolde, which possessed the power to affect the mind. According to the book, this kind of demon liked to place curses on people for amusement. Those who were cursed would gradually become younger and younger. Both their body and mind would continue to grow younger. If the curse could not be lifted, death awaited them. Senna was terrified by that conclusion. Dion tried to comfort her, saying that he and the Duke would be fine. But his words did nothing to ease Senna's worries. Then Dion showed the heroine a passage in the text, which said that Leviolde's spell relied on demonic power and therefore could not affect priests. In addition, mages and those who could use aura would only undergo minor changes. Aura users would stop growing younger once they reverted to adolescence, while mages would stop once they had become children. That was why Dion and the Duke had stopped becoming smaller, which also meant that their lives were not in danger. The book also said that this kind of demon had once been kept as pets by other demons. Anyone who touched Leviolde would immediately fall under its influence. So even if it looked like a cute little animal, it was best to stay far away from it. Senna was especially bothered by the line, "Do not pet it." After all, no normal person would ever get close to a demon, much less pet one, no matter how docile it looked. At that moment, Dion and the Duke remembered the cat they had petted earlier. It had been a snow-white stray cat. Now that they finally had a clue, they started searching for that demon. Senna, Dion, and Rashid searched every white cat in the streets in order to drag that monster out into the open. But there was still something strange. Demons usually killed people, yet all the children at the police station were safe and sound, without a single injury on them. So this demon really did seem to be acting purely for fun. While Senna and the Duke were discussing this, Dion caught another white cat. It was a large cat with blue eyes. But sadly, this one was not it either. Senna then suggested asking the hunters for help. But the Duke wanted to keep the fact that a demon had infiltrated the royal capital a secret. The heroine explained that they could actually contact one particular person. She said that since Robin already knew about this, he might be able to help. Dion asked who Robin was and why he seemed to know everything. But before Senna could answer, she was interrupted by Ellen. She came over and greeted them warmly, and there was a white cat in her arms. As they sat drinking tea, all three of them stared fixedly at the suspicious cat. Noticing their strange looks, the neighbor asked what was wrong. While Senna was still trying to brush it off, the Duke and Dion were already staring at the cat with shining eyes. Suddenly, Dion pounced on the cat, but the cat was even quicker and was not caught. Rashid also did not miss the chance to mock him. He immediately ran after the cat as well, intending to catch it himself and prove that he was better. The Duke came very close to touching his prey. However, the cat managed to dodge again. The Duke failed to catch the demon too. This time, it was Dion's turn to grin smugly. Watching these children, Ellen simply thought they were playing. Senna also pretended that they were just ordinary kids. But she alone was troubled by one question. Why did Leviolde's spell not work on Ellen? According to the Demon Encyclopedia, the only explanation was that Ellen possessed astonishing divine power. Since this neighbor had been the protagonist of a short story in Senna's previous life, Senna was convinced that this had to be the case. Meanwhile, those two had been chasing the demon around in vain the entire time. They had nearly knocked over every chair by the table, yet they had not managed to touch even a single hair on the cat. Seeing the mess the children had made, Ellen was utterly shocked. Senna scolded them, saying they should not behave so rudely in someone else's house. Amid all the chaos, only the cat remained sitting calmly, as though everything happening in front of it had nothing to do with it. Then, with a sudden cry, Dion's eyes instantly filled with tears. Senna had never expected this at all. She panicked, not knowing what to say or how to comfort the boy. Dion desperately held back his tears, refusing to let them fall. The Duke was also startled by Dion's reaction. Since Senna had no idea how to soothe Dion, she told the Duke to cooperate and act like Sasha. She explained to Rashid that they had to give him a new name, or else Ellen might notice that something was wrong. The Duke was very displeased with this new name. Dion, meanwhile, was still barely holding back his tears. The cat seemed to be mocking all of them. Looking at the three of them, Senna had absolutely no idea what to do. She did not understand what exactly everyone was expecting from her. Just then, the cat suddenly ran off. It darted all over the room, deliberately teasing them. Ellen had no idea how she could possibly help either. Senna kept pretending that the two of them were her younger cousins. But by this point, she was beginning to truly understand how hard it was for mothers to look after children. Suddenly, Ellen told the heroine that her cousins were very cute and looked a lot like her, then added that even the way they thought was similar, which really sounded hard to believe. All of a sudden, the cat opened the door by itself. Seeing that, Ellen assumed it wanted to go outside to play. Senna remembered what they had discussed in the library. The book had said that this thing was a demon, yet it looked no different from an ordinary cat. That was why they had decided to check every cat in the city. But this kind of demon also had the ability to change its appearance. And the book had pointed out that the method for capturing Leviol was somewhat different from that of other demons. The method was actually very simple. To catch it, you had to play with it for as long as possible. But the condition was that you had to keep playing until Leviol itself was satisfied. Since the author had never actually encountered this type of demon, he could not specify exactly how long that would take. He advised readers to find out for themselves. The recollection ended there, but reality remained cruel. The three of them were still running all over the place after that cat. Dion continued calling the Duke Sasha. Every time, Rashid would get angry and tell him to stop calling him that. By now, Senna was almost completely exhausted because they had already been running around for several hours. The girl shouted at Dion and Rashid, telling them not to just chase after the demon, but to try cornering it instead. But the two of them had already run too far away to hear her. Panting heavily, Senna yelled at them to at least listen to what she was saying. In the end, her strength gave out entirely, and she had no choice but to stop. Looking around, she realized that she had reached the abandoned district, and she guessed that the demon had deliberately lured them here. Suddenly, children's voices echoed all around her, but they did not belong to the Duke or Dion. As she searched for the source of the voices, something shot past her at incredible speed. It seemed to be circling around Senna at a terrifying pace. Before she knew it, the voices of children had surrounded her from every direction. Then the cat appeared in front of her and slowly approached Senna, inviting her to play. Hearing the demon call her by name, the girl was horrified. Yet the cat continued to look at her with an innocent expression. Then it ran off again. The girl did not even have time to do anything. The heroine desperately tried to calm herself so that fear would not swallow her whole. The demon kept repeating that Senna should play with him. Realizing that she had no other choice, the furious girl decided to accept the offer. Once she had made up her mind, she chased after the cat. As the demon kept fleeing, it threatened Senna with the lives of the two boys. It said that if the girl slowed down, it would eat both of them. When she reached the area near several abandoned houses, Senna abruptly stopped in her tracks. The little Duke's unconscious body was floating in the air. The demon was clearly enjoying Senna's suffering. Seeing how worried the girl was, it lifted the boy even higher. The heroine tried shouting at the Duke. At last, Rashid opened his eyes. Realizing that he was suspended in a state of weightlessness, the boy was terrified. He looked around in a panic, trying to understand what was happening. Meanwhile, the demon was having the time of its life, toying with his body through magic. Then Leviolt suddenly raised the Duke even higher before letting go. Covered in cold sweat, Senna ran toward the Duke, wanting only to catch him when he fell. The images of her dead companions surfaced before her eyes once more. Those people who had left her forever. She did not want to experience again the feeling of watching someone important die right in front of her. No matter what, she had to save the Duke, but once again she failed to make it in time. A body crashed heavily onto the ground. Seeing the little Duke lying there, Senna was overwhelmed with fear. She dropped to her knees in a daze. Grief flooded her mind. She blamed herself, thinking that even now she was still this weak. Just then, Dion's voice came from behind her. In a mocking tone, little Dion once again called the Duke Sasha and asked him why he was hanging up there. Then he used magic to lift the Duke back into the air. Rashid was furious because he had said many times already not to call him that. Dion reminded him that the only reason the Duke was still alive right now was thanks to him. Then he grinned and said that since he had already saved the Duke, it was time to release the magic. The moment the spell was undone, Rashid dropped to the ground with a thud once more. The demon watched them from the side with a satisfied smile. Once it had had enough fun, the cat said goodbye and left. Senna immediately chased after it. This time, she decided to use a magic stone. The demon was certain that this time it would definitely get away. However, the heroine unexpectedly hurled the stone at it. The magic stone exploded and dealt considerable damage to the demon. The cat lost consciousness on the spot. While it could not move, Senna calmly walked over. But once she finally stood before it, the girl could hardly believe her eyes, because this was an S-rank demon. There was no way it could be captured that easily. Her concern was immediately proven right. The demon had only been pretending. Suddenly it spoke. It said that it had not seen Senna in a very long time and asked whether she was still searching for that thing. The girl was shocked that the demon knew who she was, but Leviolt explained nothing. It merely said that since she had won one round of its game, it would grant her one wish. Shocked, the girl kept pressing it on how it knew her, but the demon replied that it would only answer that question if she used her wish to obtain the answer. Senna refused and instead wished for everyone to return to normal. After fulfilling its promise, the demon left. By then, Rashid and Dion had already caught up with Senna, but even though the demon should have lifted the spell, they were still in the form of little children. When Leviolt answered that the girl had never specifically wished for everything to return to normal immediately, the heroine was instantly enraged. Before disappearing, the demon said that it always kept its promises. After that, the Duke asked Senna what exactly had happened. It was difficult for the girl to explain everything clearly, but one thing was certain. It was over now. But just then, something suddenly happened to Dion. He lost consciousness, and his face was twisted in pain. When he woke up, he was already back at home. Sitting by his side was Senna, her face full of worry. He awkwardly averted his gaze and explained that it was only a fever. According to him, this often happened whenever he overused his magic. As long as he slept, he would recover. Suddenly, Senna asked if he wasn't curious. After all, one question had been tormenting her all this time: why demons always showed up near her house. And this time, the one who had suffered was clearly Dion, yet from the way he talked, all he cared about was how worried Senna had been for him. That turn of thought completely stunned the girl. She couldn't understand why Dion seemed not to realize that he had nearly died, and yet he was floating on air just because Senna cared that much about him. Looking at him, she even felt he had no sense of self-preservation at all. Taking advantage of the fact that he was still in a child's body, Dion rested his head on Senna's lap. Using his illness as an excuse, he asked if he could stay like that for a while. Looking at him, Senna thought that Dion really might act like a child now. So she decided to let him have his way, just for today. As she sat there with Dion, she thought of her cousins. She hadn't seen them in a long time. The last time had been at her grandfather's funeral. At first, they used to come by often, but after her grandfather and her aunt argued over the inheritance of the house, they never came again. Thinking of them, Senna couldn't help wondering whether they were doing well now. After hearing her story, Dion said it reminded him of the past too, of when he was about 7 years old. That was when his mother died. At those words, Senna froze completely. She didn't know what to say. and in the end, all she could do was offer her condolences. To comfort him, she reminded him that at least he still had his father. However, Dion said he hadn't seen his father in a long time, and he didn't miss him either, because he had never been a good husband or a good father. At the same time, Dion could understand him to some extent, since he had many things to deal with. But Senna couldn't understand that. She felt the guild leader had responsibilities toward his son. Dion asked if she knew her own father well, and Senna answered that she didn't really. She had only seen him twice, and both meetings had been unpleasant. Hearing that, Dion looked at Senna with those big, curious eyes of his. Even without saying a word, it was obvious that he wanted to know the details. Since it wasn't exactly a secret, she decided to tell him. She said the first time she had met the guild leader was when her parents went missing. The first person to tell her that her parents had disappeared in an accident during a mission was one of her grandfather's colleagues. The second person to bring the news was a knight, and the third was the guild leader. The moment she saw the expression on the guild leader's face, the heroine understood how bad things were. He expressed his regret that the investigation could not continue. After telling her story, she added that, just as she had said before, that meeting had not been a pleasant one. Looking at Dion, the girl realized that this was the first time they had ever talked like this. They had eaten together and spent quite a bit of time together, but this was still the first time they had spoken to each other so honestly. At the beginning, she hadn't wanted to get too close to him out of the simplest kind of concern. But now, to Senna, he was more than just a friend. He was a very close friend. In any case, the heroine believed that under those circumstances, the guild leader had done everything he could. After hearing Senna's story, Dion turned to look at the Duke lying on the other sofa. Senna had thought he was already asleep, but Dion stubbornly insisted that he talk about himself too. But Rashid didn't want to. Dion tried to provoke him, but he didn't take the bait. He only suggested that they go to sleep so they could return to the library early the next morning and continue looking for information on Leviel, since they still hadn't returned to their original forms. But Dion didn't actually care that much. By contrast, the Duke urgently needed to return to his proper age, because besides managing his duchy, he had quite a lot of other matters to attend to. Thinking about how he was still stuck in a child's body while his work kept piling up made him thoroughly miserable. Senna tried to reassure him by saying that while he was away, his parents would probably be taking care of the duchy's affairs for him. But Rashid cut her off and said they were both dead, and so were all his other relatives. Once again, Senna had stepped on a landmine. She froze, not knowing what to say, but the Duke comforted her instead, saying it was fine. To change the subject, the heroine said that tomorrow they would definitely find all the information they needed in the library, but for now, they should go to sleep. Then, noticing Senna's awkward position, the Duke asked how she intended to sleep. Not wanting to disturb Dion or inconvenience Rashid, she answered that she would be perfectly fine even if she didn't sleep for 3 days. The Duke couldn't sleep either. He decided to talk with the heroine a little longer and asked whether she remembered that day. The day he had been trapped in a nightmare. He said that person was his cousin, or rather, she was the daughter of the man who had tried to kill him. It was because of that uncle that Rashid had never been able to feel safe even in his own territory. There had been only a few people who supported him, and it was thanks to them that the Duke had barely survived. Yet his own relatives had even wanted to kill those who stood on his side. So the young Duke realized that he had to protect himself on his own. A great many things happened after that, but the one who killed Serena was not the Duke. It was his uncle, because he believed that their family would rather die than live as slaves stripped of power. Still, since in the end everything had happened because of him, Rashid could not consider himself entirely innocent. This story shocked Senna deeply. After finishing, the Duke added that the heroine didn't need to worry that he would forcefully take her house away. Senna simply nodded in response. But then she suddenly grew alert, not understanding why the Duke had abruptly brought up the house. Rashid explained that he knew there were rumors about him going around, which was why he had said there was no need for her to be so worried. Senna had long since regarded him as a decent person, but what bothered her was that he still had not explained why demons had been appearing in the royal capital. To reassure the heroine, he even swore that, unless there was a special reason, he would never harm a human. Hearing that, Senna realized that all this time, the Duke had been worried that she felt uneasy around him. So she asked whether he had revealed the secret about his uncle, just to set her mind at ease. The Duke did not answer directly. He only said it was hardly a secret, since the entire upper class already knew about it. Even so, the heroine knew very well that it could not have been easy for Rashid to talk about such things. After thinking for a while, he said that from his point of view, the girl had seemed very afraid of him, since she had even said she would never come near him again. But the girl had no memory at all of saying anything like that. So the Duke reminded her that it had been at his residence. Realizing that she truly didn't remember, he awkwardly asked her to forget everything he had just said. He was annoyed, feeling that all the worry he had carried around this whole time had been pointless. The girl tried to comfort the Duke, but he still felt awkward. Suddenly, Senna called out to Rashid, smiling. She thanked the Duke for trusting her, and also for telling her what had happened back then. Hearing that only made the Duke even more embarrassed. Then Senna asked why he wasn't going to sleep in a room, since the sofa was probably uncomfortable. Senna went on about the importance of getting proper rest, and promised that if she heard even the slightest movement, she would wake him immediately. Listening to the heroine's long string of lecturing, the Duke asked whether she really thought of him as a child now. When she didn't answer, he decided he might as well play along with his appearance and moved a little closer to Senna. He settled down beside the girl and said he would sleep there. Senna didn't object, and the two of them fell asleep in warmth and peace. Morning came. That night, Senna had ended up falling asleep after all. Half awake, the girl felt that she was clutching someone's hair in her hand. When she opened her eyes, Dion's face was right in front of her. The heroine was stunned. She was so shocked that she couldn't speak. And on top of that, he had already returned to normal. Utterly bewildered, the heroine asked why she was in bed. Dion answered that he had carried her there because he thought sleeping on the sofa would be uncomfortable for her. He had intended to leave immediately, but the girl hadn't let go of his hair. Hearing that, the girl quickly pulled back her hand. Just as she was about to move away, Dion caught her other hand and said that the Duke had also returned to his original age and had gone to find Allan. That meant only Dion and Senna were left in the room. He invited the girl to have breakfast with him, but in the end, that shared breakfast never happened. Senna ended up having to eat breakfast with Robin instead, while listening to him talk nonstop. Every now and then, she added a few words so as not to seem rude. Still, she simply assumed that Dion had left without even eating breakfast because he had something urgent to do. She had originally hoped to enjoy a quiet meal, only to run into Robin instead. After hearing Robin out, Senna understood that Leviol had cleaned everything up and made everyone think they had merely passed out drunk. In that kind of situation, blaming it all on alcohol really was the easiest explanation. Robin was convinced that he had drunk so much only because he hadn't had any work lately. He said he was considering going back to his hometown, especially since they had promised to arrange a job for him there. Senna supported the idea, but then Robin suddenly made an unexpected suggestion to her. He invited the heroine to go with him. The moment the words left his mouth, Robin flushed red himself. Senna couldn't understand why she would go there. In a panic, he tried to cover by saying that once they got there, he could help her find work. He even started introducing the city itself and listing its advantages, going so far as to talk about the local climate. But even after all that, he still couldn't persuade Senna. She clearly refused because she still had unfinished business here. A dejected Robin apologized for not considering her circumstances. Since they had already finished eating, Senna suggested they leave. After leaving the restaurant, they continued walking side by side and chatting. Suddenly, Senna caught the delicious smell of cookies and immediately thought of buying some for the Duke and Dion. Noticing her intention, Robin offered to buy them for her. But Dion suddenly appeared and said there was no need because he would buy them himself. Robin was startled by his abrupt appearance. Senna immediately walked over to Dion and started talking to him. Seeing how naturally they spoke together, Robin asked who he was. So Senna introduced them to each other. Dion immediately recognized Robin's name. The two sealed their acquaintance with a handshake and exchanged a few polite greetings. Then, all of a sudden, Senna noticed that Dion's hair was a little messy. Out of habit, she reached out and tidied it for him. At the same time, Dion took the opportunity to smugly show Robin just how close he was to the heroine. In Robin's eyes, they looked like a couple deeply in love. Not missing the chance, Dion added that Senna had fixed his hair this morning too. The line hit its mark perfectly, and, just as expected, Robin misunderstood. To finish off his rival completely, Dion proudly declared that he and Senna had been together this morning. Strictly speaking, that wasn't a lie, so the girl didn't deny anything. Dion asked why she wanted to buy cookies, and the heroine replied that she was planning to treat him and the Duke. The moment he heard another man's name, Robin was thrown into complete confusion. All his plans had collapsed overnight. He had thought he was the person closest to Senna. but now it was painfully obvious that this was not the case. Beside Dion, she smiled brightly and happily. Unable to bear the atmosphere, Robin ran off. In his heart, he said goodbye to the heroine and wished her happiness. Senna was the only one who didn't understand why he had reacted that way. The next day, Anna told her that Robin had gotten dead drunk and cried miserably. But Senna had no idea at all why he was so upset. Based on their conversation the day before, the girl guessed that Robin was probably sad about ending his life as a hunter. But clearly, that was not the reason. A stir broke out in the association. The hunters were excitedly talking about something. Just then, Dale and Isabella Fairville entered the guild. Everyone was surprised by the guild leader's sudden visit. Even Anna didn't know why they had come. Senna and Anna half-jokingly started dividing up the guild's property in case the guild suddenly shut down. In Senna's eyes, Dale looked like a truly awful person. She still remembered what Dion had said, that he hadn't even attended his own wife's funeral. Dion was nothing like him, and Senna was glad for that. Suddenly, Anna remembered why she had called the heroine over. The administrator had introduced her to a very good job with quite decent pay, but Senna tried to decline politely, since the rent the Duke was paying was already more than enough for her. However, Anna explained that the client had specifically requested her, so there was no way to pass the commission on to someone else. Senna guessed the client might be some kind of eccentric recluse, but her friend reassured her that it was actually the exact opposite. As soon as she heard the employer's name, Senna blushed with excitement. It turned out to be the S-rank hunter Owen. Senna had admired him for a long time because he was one of the finest hunters around, had failed no more than one mission in his life, and was the youngest hunter ever to reach that rank. He was not only a scholar, but also a world-renowned archaeologist. Hunters and ordinary people alike admired him deeply. Senna was thrilled, but she still couldn't understand why someone like him would hire her. The documents said he needed a hunter who knew Politian. Still, Senna wasn't very confident in her grasp of the language, so the fact that Owen had recognized her ability and chosen her moved her deeply. She felt proud to have been selected from among so many people. To Senna, the chance to work with Owen felt like a gift from heaven. Anna decided to tease her friend and pulled the papers back, since Senna had originally intended to refuse. But the heroine immediately stopped her and eagerly declared that she would accept the commission. After signing all the paperwork, she went to meet the client. Owen lived in an enormous mansion. A butler greeted her at the entrance and politely invited the guest inside. That kind of treatment was somewhat unfamiliar to Senna. The butler led the heroine to see his master. There were many statues lining the corridor, all positioned as though they were watching the people passing by. The sight was rather eerie. The butler said he would take Senna to Owen's study. Suddenly, the heroine noticed a huge painting hanging on the wall. It depicted a young girl with blonde hair and golden eyes, with the corpses of slain little demons lying at her feet. The girl froze when she saw the demons in the painting. Just then, a man wearing a skull mask suddenly appeared out of nowhere and stood beside her. Startled, the girl jumped, but her reaction only amused him. After removing the mask, Owen apologized and introduced himself. The girl introduced herself as well and thanked him for inviting her. When she looked at him again, she remembered something. He was one of the male lead candidates she had seen on the cover before. Owen treated Senna kindly. After the greetings were over, the two sat down in the study. All the while, one question kept circling in the heroine's mind. Why was this male lead candidate crossing paths with her instead of Ellen? She no longer wanted to interfere with the original plot. Just then, Owen interrupted her thoughts by saying that he had wanted to meet her for a long time. He said he'd been very impressed by her exploits during the Scalo expedition, and that hearing how Senna had fought demons all night to protect her injured companions made him admire her greatly. The heroine was delighted that such a high-ranking hunter respected her so much. It was also because of that demon-related incident that she had once been promoted to C rank, only to be demoted again soon after. Owen had heard many of Senna's nicknames as well. But of all of them, the one Senna hated most was the Undying One. She thought the title was too childish, since she was only a little stronger than others and recovered a bit faster. That was all. Owen however, found those traits very special and was convinced that one day Senna would reach the same rank as he had. But the heroine had no confidence in her own abilities. Suddenly, he asked whether she had any interest in ancient ruins, and Senna answered honestly that she did not. Owen thought exploring ancient ruins would be fascinating, but Senna knew that to do that kind of work, financial stability had to come first. Hearing that, Owen asked whether she didn't have anyone to support her, but the girl didn't understand who he meant. Then he stated it plainly. He was referring to Duke Allan. Owen said he would be happy to help Senna as well, but the girl said directly that she would not accept his help. To her, after all, he was just an acquaintance. Hearing that answer, Owen seemed relieved and said that the reason he had called her here was because he was very interested in her. But he was equally interested in Duke Allan. The moment she heard that, all her fantasies shattered. She decided to ask him directly whether he needed the Duke's financial backing, but he said he had no need for investment. There was another very important issue. Owen asked Senna whether, while staying with the Duke, she had ever encountered those creatures. But realizing that Kalman was trying to keep that a secret, she lied and said she had never encountered them. Owen clearly had not expected that answer. Senna was confused, unable to understand how this hunter knew about it, when even the investigation department didn't. Silence lingered for a while. Owen spoke first. He said he wanted to tell the heroine an old story. Running his hand along a row of books, he searched for a particular volume. Once he found the one he needed, he pulled it out and opened it. The girl was stunned. In a situation like this, Owen had decided to read her some kind of story. Then he began. History says that long ago, demons opened the gates of hell, entered this land, and delighted in tormenting humans. Some people suffered physical harm. Others were gradually driven towards self-destruction. The demons enjoyed turning people against one another and ultimately driving them to death. They also brought hellish evil into this world. That evil polluted the land and changed plants and animals, giving rise to the beings commonly called creatures. Demonic power also affected humans. Some lost their reason and became creatures themselves. Others absorbed that power and became mages. And the last kind, those who could purify demonic energy, became priests. The priests succeeded in eliminating most of the demons, but they could find no way to destroy the demon commanders. So they decided to seal the souls of 33 high-ranking demons within the Holy Empire. To this day, those 33 souls remain firmly sealed there. But recently, 3 of them disappeared without a trace. Owen said he had been commissioned by the Empire to track down those 3 escaped demons. It was known that 5 families had once helped the priests seal the high-ranking demons. They were the only families in the Empire who knew about the seal and the only ones who could access it. And the Kalman family was one of those 5. But the story was so long that Senna fell asleep before she heard the end. The moment she heard someone call her name, she jolted awake. Seeing that Senna had dozed off, Owen guessed that his story must have been too boring, but Senna tried to apologize, saying she had simply never been interested in legends. Yawning non-stop, she said it was fine, but Owen had no intention of ending things there. He brought over the next book and prepared to tell a second story. Senna had thought the story was already over. The next one was this. Creatures were born from demonic power, so they tended to follow demons, much like children follow their parents. Senna had already begun nodding mechanically. She only wanted this story to end as quickly as possible. Owen continued, following the contents of the book. Even when sealed, demons could still summon creatures. So if Duke Kalman possessed one of the stones, those creatures would inevitably appear around him. Owen also said that he was searching not only for demons, but also for a female priest. Senna immediately understood who he meant. Owen noticed her reaction too. He suggested continuing with the next story, saying she was sure to like it. The girl realized she had slipped up. Her expression had already given everything away. Owen's face plainly said that he had caught hold of her weakness. The heroine had already started desperately searching for excuses, bracing herself for a barrage of questions from the hunter, but he asked nothing. Instead, Owen began telling the story of the first female priest. She had sacrificed herself to seal the 33 high-ranking demons, and that seal still bound them to this day. However, there was one condition. Every generation would inevitably have its own female priest, and her blood was the only way to break the seal. According to the information he had, Duke Kalman was searching for a certain woman, and if he intended to break the seal, then he had to be eliminated. It was for the greater good. Hearing that last sentence, the girl shot to her feet and repeated once again that she knew nothing. Then Owen suggested that she simply ask him directly herself. The girl was shocked. She was furious because this hunter was completely ignoring everything she had said. Realizing there was no point in continuing the conversation, Senna said goodbye and headed for the exit. Owen, still smiling, bid her farewell as well. A sheet of paper about demons happened to fall right in front of Senna. It showed a crying demon, and above the picture was a line of text. It had been translated from Pali and meant lie. The next day, Senna found a huge pile of assorted items in front of her house. She wanted to return everything, but the employee was practically begging her not to, or he would be punished. In the end, she agreed to keep the items. The worker immediately handed over the remaining boxes too, then ran off as fast as he could before the girl could change her mind. Left standing there with the useless boxes in her arms, the girl had no idea what to do with them. She decided to move everything inside first. Owen's words kept replaying in her mind. One question kept tormenting her. Had the Duke really never loved Ellen at all? Thinking back on all the time they had spent together, Senna realized that whenever he was by her side, he had never once thought of Ellen. Aaron had never said that the Duke loved Ellen either. More precisely, he had only described her as someone important to the Duke. And the role of the female priest suited Ellen perfectly. Besides, considering that her blood was connected to demons, it was undoubtedly the best choice for driving the plot forward. In Senna's mind, the story went like this. The villain would search for Ellen in order to break the seal. The male leads would step in to protect her. And over time, she would gradually fall in love. And Senna, as her neighbor, would be doomed to suffer constant stress because of those demonic creatures. At first, Senna had always thought the Duke was the male lead, but now she was beginning to accept another possibility, that he might actually be the villain. Her thoughts were interrupted by Dion's sudden appearance. When Senna asked whether he had gone home, he answered slyly that he had. Seeing the large pile of boxes, Dion thought the heroine had gone shopping, but Senna said they were all gifts from someone else. In truth, the girl was troubled by having to deal with all this by herself, so it was lucky that Dion was there. He started helping her, though he was still very curious about who had sent all of it. Suddenly, Senna let out a scream. She stared at the boxes in shock. Inside them was a huge pile of mana crystals. She couldn't even imagine how much they were worth. Dion suggested checking the rest of the boxes and bags too. Looking at the stones, Senna thought she really ought to return everything because she couldn't accept gifts this expensive. Still, since there were so many stones, she couldn't help thinking that if she took one or two, probably no one would notice. After checking everything, Dion said some of the boxes contained magical items that looked extremely expensive. She barely managed to restrain her greed, put the stones back, and decided to return everything. But she couldn't leave all of it outside forever, so she asked Dion to move it inside for now. Seeing Dion lift the boxes so effortlessly, Senna was amazed. She had thought those boxes would be heavy. After all, even Owen's servants could barely carry two at a time. At first, they decided to move everything upstairs to the second floor. But Dion could not stop wondering who had sent Senna such gifts. Since explaining about Owen would take too long, the heroine decided not to mention his name. She only answered that they were from a friend of hers. Dion was not pleased to hear that, and the look on his face made Senna turn pale. In the end, she could not sleep at all that night. All night long, the heroine tried to recall memories from her previous life, hoping to remember even a little, but in the end she got nowhere. As usual, the Duke prepared breakfast and set the table. Seeing Senna's expression, he thought she did not like it, but all she could think about was the sealing stone. Meanwhile, the Duke was waiting eagerly to hear what she thought of his cooking. When he did not hear the praise she usually gave him, he asked whether he should make something else, but Senna said there was no need because everything tasted good. Once he learned that she liked the food, the Duke finally began eating breakfast too, but he was still concerned about what had happened while he was away, because Dion was very obviously in a bad mood. Senna did not know how to explain it. After all, ever since Senna had said those gifts were from someone she knew, he had been acting like this. Dion even got up from the table before finishing his meal, which was very unusual for him. Both Senna and Kalman were shocked, because he usually ate more than anyone else. But Dion only sat silently on the sofa, saying nothing and asking nothing. Seeing how strangely Dion was behaving, the Duke thought he and Senna must have had an argument, but the girl said they had not fought. In fact, she did not even know what exactly he was angry about. Kalman offered to help, saying he could ask Dion for her. He had also wanted to tell them the latest news, but in this atmosphere, it was hard to bring it up. Dion continued to stare at them, without saying a word. The Duke also said that Aaron had something to bring him, and once Aaron arrived, he would find a chance to explain everything clearly. Senna was delighted, because the Duke was finally going to reveal everything he knew about demons. Still, watching Dion keep averting his gaze, Senna decided to break the tension first. She said she would go get some cake, since Dion liked sweets more than anything. The Duke immediately brightened and agreed with the idea, and seeing the radiant smile on Kalman's face, the heroine became more and more certain that he could not possibly be some hidden villain. Dion clearly wanted to join their conversation, yet he kept sulking. To cheer Dion up, Senna deliberately bought the most delicious cake she could find, hoping he would like it. But just then, someone suddenly called out to her. When she turned around, she saw that it was Owen. He ran up to Senna and told her they had a serious problem. Owen asked her where she had put the magic tools he had sent over. The girl answered that they were all at home and said she had been planning to return them to him. But he said it was already too late because something quite strange had gotten mixed in with those items, and they had to hurry back at once or the house might explode. The girl was so shocked that she could not speak, frozen in place by fear. After all, her house could be blown sky high at any moment. She immediately dashed back home. Senna was absolutely furious and did not even bother listening to Owen shouting behind her. When she finally got home, she confirmed that everything still looked normal. There was no sign at all that anything had exploded inside. But just because nothing had happened yet did not mean it would not blow up later. She immediately demanded that Owen tell her exactly what the thing was so she could return it right away. But that idiot said it was dangerous and that if she was careless, it might explode right in her hands. Senna went pale and asked him why he had sent her something like that in the first place. But Owen could only keep apologizing. Senna said all the gifts were in the room upstairs on the second floor and told them to hurry and find what they needed. She only wanted this matter resolved as quickly as possible. But then she suddenly remembered that the Duke was still at her house, and Owen was suspicious of him. Worse still, he had even made up his mind to eliminate him. So they absolutely could not meet. But she had no time to stop him. Luckily, though, the Duke was not there. She did not understand where the Duke and Dion had gone, so she did not know what to do. Thinking they must have gone somewhere else, Senna finally breathed a sigh of relief. She let Owen into the house and even prepared tea for him. She said everything he had sent was upstairs on the second floor. But then he suddenly said he suspected a thief had broken into the house. When he pulled out a gun, the girl was terrified and hurriedly told him to put it away, saying there was no one else in the house. But Owen insisted. He pointed out the shoe prints on the floor to Senna, and they were obviously not hers. Because of that, Owen was certain there was someone else in the house. Senna desperately tried to persuade him, but she could not tell him the truth. Then the man suddenly revealed his true purpose, saying that the possibility of an explosion was not the real issue at all. He asked for permission to search her house. However, this had been his real purpose from the very beginning. He had come to capture the Duke. Senna tried to stop him and kept insisting that there was no thief in her house. But catching a thief was only an excuse, and Owen paid no attention to her words. Suddenly, footsteps came from inside the house, and the girl's face turned white as she realized the Duke was probably still there. Owen immediately headed toward the sound. The girl completely panicked. She did not know what to do or how to stop him. Owen was clearly determined to catch the Duke. Once he found the room, he shoved the door open and pointed his gun at the unidentified person inside. But the next second, someone knocked the gun out of his hand. The Duke instantly subdued the intruder, and Dion picked up the gun. He slowly walked toward Owen, pressed the gun to his head, and asked whether it was really worth firing. But Senna spoke up to stop them. Owen thought she had come to help him, and hurriedly begged her to stop the two of them. But the heroine had no intention of helping him at all. She merely said that if they really meant to finish him off, they should go outside and do it in the street. Dion and the Duke answered in unison that they had been planning to do exactly that. Owen had never expected things to turn out like this. In the end, he was tied up and prepared for further questioning. The Duke, Senna, and Dion stood in front of him. Owen tried to hide his emotions and greeted Duke Kalman, but the other man did not even remember him at all. Owen claimed they had met 3 times, but Kalman still could not remember. Owen looked like he wanted to kill him with his eyes, while the Duke did not even notice. Then he suddenly turned to Dion and asked who he was, since they had never met before. After listening to Owen lecture him on the proper way to hold a gun, Dion decided to show him his skills personally. Once Owen realized Dion was no ordinary person, he started begging Senna to take him away. Even the heroine did not know what to do, because every extra word out of Owen's mouth only made Dion angrier. Looking at him, Senna remembered the last time they had met. Back then, she had truly been happy. But now everything was different. She told Owen to answer honestly and asked whether he had come to kill the Duke. Owen was furious at the accusation, but the heroine reminded him that he had been the first one to lie, making up that story about explosives hidden among the gifts. Hearing that, Dion finally realized that Owen was the one who had sent those gifts. He immediately pressed him, asking whether he had done it because of some personal feelings towards Senna, and only calmed down after hearing the answer was no. Owen confessed that he only wanted to recover the sealing stone stolen by the previous Duke Kalman and find the saintess. Owen firmly believed that Senna was the saintess. Those words stunned the heroine, and not just her. Even the Duke was shocked. Dion was equally astonished. After hearing that, they tried to imagine what Senna would look like as the saintess. But once they did, all three of them burst out laughing. They simply could not understand how he had reached such a conclusion. Afterward, Owen said he had heard rumors that she was famous for her healing powers, but Senna denied those rumors. As for the claims that she was immortal and things like that, those were all false too. On top of that, the heroine hated the temple. She was sick of those people in white robes and was not close to a single priest. Besides, the heroine had never used holy power to heal anyone. The only thing she had was an exceptionally healthy body. Learning that he had mistaken her for the saintess dealt Owen a heavy blow. Then he asked the Duke about the sealing stone, but Kalman swore in the name of his family that no such thing had ever happened, then seriously wondered where on earth Owen had heard such a ridiculous story. Owen told them to check the inside pocket of his coat, where there was a ring. Both Dion and the Duke thought it was fake. Only Senna had no idea what it was. The Duke explained that it was the Holy Emperor's ring. Dion took the ring from Kalman's hand, wanting to confirm whether it was genuine. As he spoke, he threw it, but the ring suddenly vanished, and in the next moment it reappeared on Owen's finger. That was how they confirmed the ring was real. Owen also reminded them that he had told them from the start that he had come under orders from the Holy Empire. But Senna had been half asleep at the time and had forgotten all about it. Now that Owen had produced his ring, he told the Duke to show his as well. But Kalman answered that he did not have a ring. He said that ring had disappeared 30 years ago, since such a ring could not be taken by force. The very idea that it had vanished was difficult to believe. The Duke was clearly hiding something. Owen believed no one. Dion observed everyone. Senna, meanwhile, was stunned by everything unfolding in front of her. In fact, there was not only one Holy Emperor's ring. Besides the original one, there were 5 more replicas identical in form and properties. Once they were a certain distance from their owner, they too would automatically return. The first saintess had given them to 5 different families as a symbol of a promise, to guard the sealed demons together and keep their existence secret. But 30 years ago, the person holding the Kalman family's ring fled with the stone that sealed the demon. And recently, hunters had witnessed a massive abnormal surge of mutated creatures. That was why the mages from the Association's search division had gone far away on a long-term mission. Hearing this, Senna realized that her earlier suspicions had been wrong. The Investigation division had only decided to look into the matter. But right in the middle of all this, Duke Kalman had arrived in the capital and begun searching for that woman, which looked extremely suspicious. Listening to Owen, Senna understood that although his judgment was not perfect, it was not without basis. Senna could not help repeatedly wondering whether the Duke had some other motive. Just then, Aaron arrived, as punctual as ever. Seeing the dreadful scene before him, he decided it would be better not to get involved. He was too frightened to say a word. Still, he quickly came to his senses and decided to turn around and leave. But Senna called out to him. She tried to explain everything. Interrupting their exchange, the Duke told him to hand over what he had brought. It was only an ordinary diary, but the smell coming from it was so awful that no one even wanted to touch it. It felt as if opening it would bring a curse down on you. The Duke explained that they had already checked it, and there was nothing wrong with the notebook. At that moment, Dion suddenly thought of something. He picked up the diary and walked straight toward Owen. That man immediately grew wary and started shouting at Dion not to come closer. But Dion used magic to loosen the restraints on his hand a little, then used the same method to force him to take the diary. After that, he ordered Owen to open it, but Owen was afraid he might be cursed if he did. Even so, Dion insisted, reminding him that the Duke had already said there was nothing wrong with it. Senna also agreed with Dion's idea. At that point, the Duke offered to open it himself, but Owen refused, saying he did not trust him. Although he was terrified, he still managed to overcome his fear. Just as Kalman had said, there was no curse at all. These were the records of a man. He had been locked in a basement, where Marquis Ulysses experimented on him. At one point, the unidentified man realized he could control the black smoke gathering at his fingertips. The Marquis was overjoyed at the sight and shouted that he was creating magic, that they were almost successful. The Marquis collected the smoke in a bottle. After that, the narrator's memory was cut off. Some time later, the Marquis dragged a blonde girl into his cell. Crying, she said she was scared. Seeing that, the narrator told her not to cry and asked her name. The child answered Ellen. At that moment, the narrator instinctively realized that her blood was being used for the experiments. This story was also part of Ellen's story. After finishing it, they closed the diary. Dion was stunned. The Duke had already known about it, so he simply watched the others' reactions. Senna felt a chill run down her spine. She couldn't believe anyone had gone through such experiments. The Duke said that 2 years ago, he had happened to encounter the person who wrote the diary. According to the record, the Marquis had tried to use St. Helen's blood to break the seal and resurrect the demon race. However, whether he succeeded remains unknown, because the man's magic was extremely weak and unstable, and he couldn't go very far from the Marquis's estate, most likely because he still needed Ellen's blood. After returning the diary, Owen asked where that man was now. The Duke replied that he didn't know, because he had lost track of him. Kalman also didn't know where he was now, but the Duke had found the place where he used to live. That diary had been discovered there. The Duke showed the diary to the Emperor, and the Emperor ordered that Ellen's safety had to be secured first. That was why, when Kalman found her, he first suggested going to the Kalman estate, but Ellen refused. That had originally been the best way to protect her, so after being turned down, the Duke also found it regrettable. He even guessed that maybe Ellen simply didn't like him. After hearing the story, Senna realized this had been her mistake, and she felt guilty toward both Ellen and the Duke. When Ellen asked about the monsters that had appeared in the imperial capital, the Duke replied that they were most likely sent by demons for the sake of obtaining Ellen's blood. However, there had been a problem with the barrier, so it had failed to function properly. By now, all the imperial mages had already been dispatched to investigate the issue. After learning the full truth, Senna felt guilty for ever suspecting the Duke. After all, he wasn't some stalker. The Duke had simply been doing his best to protect Ellen all along. Senna blamed herself for messing everything up. Seeing her like that, Dion began to worry. The Duke, meanwhile, blamed everything on himself. He thought he simply hadn't done enough. The more the Duke blamed himself, the more Senna blamed herself too. She tried to say something comforting, hoping to ease her guilt at least a little. The Duke shyly thanked her for her kindness. To make herself feel a little better, Senna kept supporting the Duke. The Duke asked Senna what she planned to do after hearing all of this. The heroine replied that, just as before, she would protect her home. Ellen's safety would be no different. Senna was about to suggest telling Ellen everything, but Owen interrupted her. Only then did the Duke realize that he had heard their entire conversation as well. The two men were both wary of each other. Obviously, there was no way they could become friends. Looking at Dion, Senna felt that he too had probably been shaken by learning about Ellen's past. Suddenly, the heroine turned to Dion. She told him to come with her. Dion followed without hesitation. Once they reached the living room, Senna asked Dion whether he was worried about everything that had happened. When he answered yes, the heroine said she understood how he felt. Hearing that, Dion excitedly asked when she had found out. Senna replied that it had been recently. Dion felt a little embarrassed that his feelings had been exposed. To comfort him, Senna said she'd known for a long time that he liked her. Hearing that last sentence, Dion realized they weren't talking about the same girl at all. He quickly cut her off and asked who exactly she meant. Senna answered that, of course, she meant Ellen, because after being rejected by Ellen, he had even cried in front of her house. She also said that she had always known Dion hadn't given up on Ellen, but since Ellen was the saintess, she would remain in danger from now on as well. Dion said nothing more and simply listened to Senna speak. But then the heroine suddenly suggested that Dion stop coming to her house from now on. Dion froze on the spot. Senna thought she was doing it for Dion's safety. She added that there was no need to worry about Ellen, because the Duke would protect her. After hearing the girl's string of reasons, Dion realized that Senna believed he would be in danger. But he couldn't understand why she thought that. Senna explained that because he lacked real combat experience, he would likely get hurt if he fought demons. So Dion reminded her that he was a mage, and Senna remembered everything, including how he had nearly died after losing control of his magic. Only then did the girl truly realize how serious it was. She desperately tried to persuade him, but he believed he could still be useful too. So he asked her not to forbid him from coming here anymore. Faced with that expression, Senna simply couldn't be harsh. She really couldn't bring herself to say no to that adorable face. So when she refused, she turned her face away so she wouldn't waver. She couldn't let him walk into danger. And to make him back down, she told him just how terrifying demons really were, but Dion merely stayed silent. Suddenly, he asked whether she really wanted to paint him as some bastard who ignored danger. He couldn't believe Senna wanted him to abandon everyone and run away alone. Senna had no answer to that. He brought up Ellen again, saying he wanted to protect her himself and asked to be allowed to come to this house. After arguing for so long, Senna had run out of reasonable excuses to refuse him. She agreed, but on one condition. Dion agreed without hesitation, saying he would do whatever she asked. He was prepared for anything. A little later, the Duke joined them as well. When the Duke asked what they were doing, Dion answered bitterly that he should come see for himself. Dion was sitting in the middle of a pile of books, reading one about demons. Just as the Duke was about to leave, Senna noticed him and called him over too. She was holding a tall stack of books in her arms. Seeing so many books, the Duke asked what they were for. Senna shoved another stack into Dion's arms to read, and his face instantly turned pale with fright. Senna explained to the Duke that they were all books about demons and monsters. They were necessary preparations for the battle ahead. The heroine explained that if they wanted to win, they had to know more about their enemy. She didn't even give Dion time to catch his breath from all the reading. She also told the Duke that Ellen and Dion had known each other since childhood, but because of her memory loss, Ellen no longer remembered it. That was exactly why Dion wanted to fight those monsters alongside them. While they were talking, Dion had no idea how he was supposed to escape from all those books. Senna had prepared a stack for the Duke too. She asked him a few questions to confirm the level of his training and learn about his real combat experience. After finishing the part about demons, Senna moved on to another very important topic. She proposed telling Ellen everything, but the Duke thought that would be impossible. At that moment, Ellen suddenly knocked on the door. Recognizing her neighbor's voice, Senna got up to answer it. The Duke suggested speaking to her immediately. Although he thought it was unlikely to work, he still felt there was no harm in trying. First, he thought he and Dion should leave. Senna waited until the two men had gone upstairs. Only then did she open the door. Standing on the threshold was her sweet neighbor. She had brought cookies for Senna. She also said she had a gift for the heroine. Senna invited her inside and offered her tea. While waiting for Senna, Ellen noticed a dragon-shaped ornament and thought it was some kind of magical item. But the heroine said it was just an ordinary lamp, and that she had bought it simply because it looked cool. Though in truth, she had bought it because Dion liked it. Ellen was surprised to learn it was just a normal lamp. Senna felt a little awkward because she didn't know how to begin the conversation. So she decided to start with the cookies, but the basket didn't contain only cookies. Ellen shyly explained that there was some ointment she had made herself. She had prepared it after noticing the wound on Senna's hand. Ellen also apologized for bringing the ointment so late. Senna had never mentioned her injury, so she hadn't expected Ellen to notice. Even so, she was touched by Ellen's concern. The neighbor explained that she wasn't a doctor, but still hoped Senna would accept the gift. Senna was absolutely delighted with it. Ellen was also happy that her feelings had been appreciated. Senna was deeply moved by the heroine's kindness, but she still forced herself to pull it together. Because a serious conversation still lay ahead, Senna decided to begin by asking where Ellen had been before opening the flower shop. Ellen replied that she wasn't really sure herself because all her memories were blurry. She said that people from the temple had found her unconscious in the forest. They gave her a place to live and work, and Ellen spent all the money she earned on opening the flower shop. For some reason, her name was the only thing she remembered clearly. She didn't remember her parents either, but she had no desire to go looking for them. Pointing to an old scar on her forehead, Ellen said she had a feeling her past life hadn't been a good one. The moment Senna thought about Ellen having been treated that way by her family, she burned with anger. Noticing Senna's anger, Ellen gently took her hand. She tried to calm Senna down and said there was no need to worry, because ever since she moved here, she had been surrounded by good people, and what made her happiest of all was meeting Senna. She thanked Senna for always protecting her. Looking at the woman before her, whose face was full of happiness, Senna began to doubt her plan, because the past would only bring Ellen pain. Because Senna had fallen deep into thought, she held Ellen's hand for too long. Even so, since Ellen's safety was at stake, she still believed telling her everything was the right thing to do. So she asked whether Ellen knew Marchioness Ulysses, but for some reason, her neighbor didn't hear the question. So she asked again, this time much louder, but the result was the same. Senna couldn't understand what was happening, so she could only shout the question out. After a moment of silence, Ellen suddenly said that she couldn't hear what Senna was saying at all. After Ellen left, Senna sat there completely stunned. She couldn't understand why it had been taken so far that Ellen couldn't even hear the Marchioness's name. Dion replied that it was most likely entirely Ellen's own choice, because that mage had probably done exactly as she requested. Senna was a little surprised by the cold tone he used when talking about Ellen. Suddenly, Dion remembered that he had once mentioned the Marchioness's name during a conversation with Ellen, and guessed that the reason she absolutely didn't want to hear that name was probably because it carried far too many painful memories. Senna couldn't even imagine what that child must have gone through to the point that she didn't even want to hear her own name. Owen had been secretly listening to their conversation the whole time, so he also learned that Ellen couldn't hear the Marchioness's name. A few hours earlier, Owen had been standing in front of Senna's house, thinking that there really was something suspicious about the Duke. He could easily have forged the diary, and he had also avoided the question about the ring. He first decided to talk to Senna one more time, but the one standing at the door was Ellen. The moment he saw her, Owen immediately hid. Watching her, he saw the girl enter Senna's house. Then the heroine's voice rang out loudly. For reasons Owen couldn't understand, she kept shouting the Marquee's name over and over. So he moved closer, trying to find out what exactly was going on. After hearing that girl's conversation, he realized that Ellen had never heard the name Ulysses at all. Back in the present, Senna, Dion, and the Duke were discussing their plans for the future. Senna stated her decision, saying that she would protect her home and also help protect Ellen. However, she immediately made it clear that she would only fight monsters and did not want to get involved in matters between the Duke and the demons. The Duke accepted her condition and happily thanked her for being willing to help. Owen was stunned by the expression on Kalman's face. This man was a cold-blooded monster who had killed every family member that stood in his way. And yet now he was thanking a commoner with such a foolish smile on his face. To say Owen was shocked did not even begin to cover it. Suddenly, Senna sensed something, but Owen managed to hide in time. After the discussion ended, Senna told everyone to go back to what they were doing. The hunter let out a sigh of relief, realizing he had not been discovered. But after finishing their talk about monsters, they started chatting about everyday things. Dion told the Duke to prepare dinner. Senna was thrilled and asked the Duke what he was going to make, and Kalman proudly said that he was working on a dish. Owen stared at them with his mouth hanging open and his eyes wide, because he had expected them to discuss a new plan or talk about Ellen. He simply could not believe they were just going to leave it at that. But no matter what, he did not trust the Duke, and he wondered how he could approach him without being noticed. Then he remembered how close Senna and the Duke were, and he found a solution. The next day, Senna's face twisted in shock. Owen was standing at her door again, saying that he had come to accept punishment. The girl had no idea what he was talking about, nor could she understand why he looked so happy while asking to be punished. When she stayed silent, he went ahead and suggested it himself, saying she could hit him however she wanted. Senna thought he was a pervert and immediately told him to leave. But Owen insisted that he had sincerely come to apologize for his mistake. He went on at length about how sorry he was. He said that he was usually more rational, but this time his legs had moved before his brain because he thought the Duke was threatening her. After saying all that, Owen felt very pleased with himself because he thought it was a perfect apology. However, the heroine saw it differently. The moment Owen finished speaking, she said goodbye and slammed the door shut. Owen was completely dumbfounded. This was not at all the reaction he had imagined. Senna walked back to her room in irritation, unable to understand why she had to listen to such nonsense first thing in the morning. Dion asked who had come, and Senna replied that it was some clingy delivery man. Owen was still outside shouting for Senna. The moment Dion heard his voice, he immediately knew who it was.